Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Cragmont, and I've been a ranger in the Cherokee National Forest for 18 years. Seen just about everything these mountains can throw at you: bear attacks, flash floods, tourists who think they know better than the wilderness. But what happened to me in Copper Creek Gorge that October? Well, that changed everything I thought I knew about these hills. I was 44 then, third generation to wear the ranger uniform. My daddy worked these same trails, and his daddy before him. We Cragmonts know every rock and route from here to the Cumberland Gap. Least, that's what I always told myself. The morning it all started, I was sitting in my truck outside the Devil's Backbone trailhead, sipping coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Thick fog rolled through the hollow like spilled milk, and frost covered everything with a thin coat of silver. October in the Smokies, my favorite time of year, when the tourists thin out and the mountains feel like they belong to the people again. My radio crackled. "Sam, you copy?" Jenny Ashworth's voice, still green but eager. "Been on the job 3 months. Go ahead, Jenny. Got a report on 3 missing cavers. Names are David Chen, Sarah Mills, and Robert Tucker. All experienced. Family says they were due back yesterday from Copper Creek system." I set down my coffee cup. Copper Creek was serious cave country. Limestone passages that went down for miles, carved out by underground rivers that had been flowing since before the Cherokee walked these hills. Not a place for weekend warriors. How experienced we talking? Chen's been caving 15 years. Mills is certified cave rescue. Tucker's mapped half the systems in Virginia. That got my attention. These weren't college kids with flashlights and a YouTube tutorial. These were people who knew what they were doing. "I'll head down and take a look, Radio Pete. Tell him to bring the cave gear." Already did. He's loading up now. I started the truck and began the winding drive down to Copper Creek. The Cherokee called this area the breathing place. Said the mountains inhaled and exhaled through the caves, like the earth was alive. Old stories. Never put much stock in them, but they stuck with you all the same. The fog grew thicker as I descended into the gorge. By the time I reached the parking area near the main cave entrance, I could barely see 20 feet in any direction. My headlights cut through the mist like butter, but it closed right back up behind me. I'd been working cave rescues for 12 years, ever since I got certified after that mess with the Hartley boy back in '59. Cave country was different from regular search and rescue. Underground, your radio was useless. Your sense of direction meant nothing. You had to trust your rope, your lights, and your partner. Nothing else mattered. Pete Millfield was already there when I arrived, unloading gear from his truck. 15 years on the job, steady as bedrock. If Pete was worried, he didn't show it. "Morning, Sam. Found their vehicle." He pointed through the fog to a blue Ford van parked at the far end of the lot. "Looks like they went in through the main entrance." We walked over to the cave mouth, a dark gash in the limestone cliff face, about 8 feet wide and 12 feet tall. The Cherokee had painted symbols on the rocks around it, red ochre marks that looked fresh even though they were probably centuries old. Something about those markings always made me uncomfortable, like they were meant to keep something in rather than warn people away. "Ropes still anchored," Pete said, checking the climbing gear they'd left behind. "But look at this." He held up the end of their climbing rope. It was cut clean through, not frayed like it would be from rockfall or wear. The cut was so smooth, it looked like someone had taken a knife to it. "Could have been a sharp rock," I said, but even as I said it, I didn't believe it. I'd seen what sharp rocks did to climbing rope. This was different. "Maybe," Pete said. He didn't believe it either. We spent the next hour setting up our own gear. 300 feet of climbing rope, carbide helmet lamps, first aid kit, emergency food and water for 24 hours. Standard cave rescue protocol. I'd done it dozens of times. But as we prepared to enter the cave, something felt wrong. The air coming out of the cave mouth was too cold for October, and there was a smell to it, like copper pennies mixed with something else I couldn't identify. The fog seemed to avoid the cave entrance, swirling around it, but never going inside. "You hear that?" Pete asked. I listened. Complete silence. No bats, no water dripping, no echo from deep inside. Caves always had some kind of sound. The breathing of the mountain, my daddy used to call it. But Copper Creek was holding its breath. "Probably just the weather," I said, checking my headlamp. "One more time. Let's go find these people." We clipped into our rope and stepped into the darkness. The main passage of Copper Creek Cave ran straight back into the mountain for about 200 feet before branching off into smaller tunnels. I'd been in here maybe a dozen times over the years, usually to retrieve some fool who'd gotten lost or hurt. I knew the layout by heart, or thought I did. "This doesn't look right," Pete said after we'd been walking for 10 minutes. His carbide lamp threw dancing shadows on the limestone walls. Passage should have split by now. I checked my compass. The needle spun lazily, never settling on any direction. Cave minerals could mess with compasses, but I'd never seen it this bad. "Must be iron deposits," I said, but my voice sounded thin in the strange silence. We kept walking. The passage was narrower than I remembered, and the walls seemed to press in closer the deeper we went. Our footsteps made no echo. The sound just died a few feet ahead of us, swallowed by the thick darkness. "Sam?" Pete had stopped walking. "Look at this." He was shining his light on the cave floor. There, in the soft mud that collected in the low spots, were boot prints. 3 sets. Just like we'd expect from our missing cavers. But these prints were arranged in a perfect circle, all facing outward, like the 3 people had been standing back to back. "Maybe they were looking at something," I suggested. "Cave paintings or formations." But when we looked up at the walls and ceiling, there was nothing there. Just blank limestone, smooth as glass. We followed the prints deeper into the cave. The temperature kept dropping, had to be 20 degrees colder than the outside air. Our breath misted in the beams of our headlamps. "There," Pete said, pointing ahead. "Light." Sure enough, there was a faint glow coming from around a bend in the passage. We picked up our pace, thinking we'd found our missing cavers. But when we rounded the corner, the light was gone. "Could have sworn I saw something," Pete muttered. "Me too." But now I was starting to doubt my own eyes. We found the first piece of equipment about 50 feet past the bend. A caving helmet, carbide lamp still attached but cold. No damage to it, no signs of struggle. Just sitting there in the middle of the passage like someone had carefully placed it. "David Chen" was written on a piece of tape inside the helmet. "Why would he take off his helmet?" Pete asked. I didn't have an answer. In cave rescue training, they teach you that your helmet and lights are life. You never take them off. No matter what. We kept searching. Every few minutes, we'd find something else. A water bottle here, a pack of batteries there. All arranged neatly, like someone was laying out a trail for us to follow. But there were no signs of the cavers themselves. "Sam," Pete called from ahead. "You need to see this." He was standing at another branch in the cave system. But this wasn't on any map I'd ever seen. The passage split 3 ways instead of 2, and each tunnel disappeared into darkness. "This wasn't here last time I mapped this section," I said. "When was that?" 2 years ago. Caves don't just grow new passages in 2 years. But there it was, and carved into the limestone wall between the passages were fresh marks, symbols that looked almost like Cherokee pictographs, but wrong somehow. The lines were too sharp, too precise, like they'd been cut with modern tools. "Which way?" Pete asked. I was about to answer when I heard it, my own voice, calling from deep in the left tunnel. "Pete, over here, found them." But I was standing right next to Pete. I wasn't calling from anywhere. Pete looked at me, his face pale in the carbide light. "That was your voice." "I know." The voice called again, definitely mine, definitely coming from the left passage. "Hurry up, they're hurt." Every instinct told me to follow that voice. It sounded urgent, desperate, but I was right here, and I hadn't said a word. "We're not going down there," I said quietly. "But what if?" That's not me calling. I checked my watch. We'd been underground for 2 hours, but it felt like we'd only walked for 20 minutes. "We're getting out of here. Now." We turned around and headed back toward the entrance, moving faster than was safe on the uneven cave floor. But behind us, the voice kept calling. Sometimes it was mine, sometimes Pete's, sometimes voices we didn't recognize. "David? Sarah? Robert? Where are you?" The voices echoed from multiple passages now, a chorus of people calling for our missing cavers. We reached the first branch point and stopped. 3 passages led away from where we stood, but we'd only come from one direction. There should only be one way back to the entrance. "Which way?" Pete whispered. I looked at my compass again. Still spinning. No help there. That's when I saw my own boot prints in the mud. Not from when we'd walked in. These were coming from the passage to our right, leading toward where we stood. But I'd never been in that passage. I shined my light down the right tunnel and saw more footprints. 2 sets this time, mine and Pete's, heading away from us into the darkness. Like we'd already walked that way, even though we'd never been there. "Sam." Pete's voice was shaking now. "Look." He was pointing at the wall. There, carved into the limestone in fresh letters, were our names. Samuel Cragmont and Peter Millfield. Below that, a date from 3 days ago. But 3 days ago, I'd been replacing a bridge railing 20 miles from here. I'd never been in this cave 3 days ago. Behind us, the voices were getting closer. We chose the middle passage and ran. The carbide flames on our helmets flickered in the rushing air, throwing wild shadows that seemed to reach for us with grasping 2 fingers. The voices behind us had multiplied. Now it sounded like dozens of people calling from the depths of the cave. "Sam, Pete, help us. We're lost. Something's down here with us." But underneath all those familiar voices was something else. A sound like stone grinding against stone, getting closer. The passage curved sharply to the left, then opened into a chamber I'd never seen before. Our lights couldn't reach the ceiling, and the walls stretched away into darkness on both sides. It was huge, big enough to hide a house. "This isn't on any survey," I panted, trying to catch my breath. "Chamber this size, we would have mapped it years ago." Pete was checking his equipment with shaking hands. "Radio's dead, compass is still spinning. And look at this." He held up our climbing rope. Sometime during our retreat, it had developed a series of perfect knots, spaced exactly 1 foot apart. Neither of us remembered tying them. "We need to find another way." "Out," I said. "There's always more than one entrance to caves this size." We started across the chamber, our light sweeping back and forth. The floor was covered with a fine layer of dust that showed no footprints except our own. But as we walked, I noticed something strange. Every few feet, there were small piles of personal items, wallets, keys, jewelry, glasses, all arranged in neat little stacks, like someone had been collecting them. I picked up one of the wallets and opened it. Driver's license for someone named Michael Torres, expired 1967. Below that, another license for Jennifer Hayes, expired 1963. The whole wallet was full of IDs, all expired, all from different years going back to the 1940 seconds. "Pete, look at this." But when I turned around, Pete was gone. "Pete?" My voice echoed in the vast chamber, but there was no answer. I spun in a circle, my headlamp beams searching the darkness. "Pete!" "Over here, Sam." His voice came from directly behind me. I turned, and there he was, standing maybe 10 feet away. But something was wrong with the way he moved. Too stiff, like someone working a marionette. "Where did you go?" "I was right here the whole time." Pete's voice sounded normal, but his face was hidden in the shadow cast by his helmet lamp. "Found something interesting." He held up another helmet. This one had Pete Millfield written on the tape inside. "That's not possible," I said. "You're wearing your helmet." Pete reached up and touched his head. He was indeed wearing a helmet. So where had the second one come from? "Maybe it's an old one," he said, but his voice sounded different now. Flatter, like he was reading from a script. "Pete, we need to get out of here, right now." "Sure, Sam, whatever you say." But he didn't move. Just stood there, holding the duplicate helmet, his face still hidden in shadow. I backed away slowly, my hand moving to the iron carabiner on my belt. My grandfather had given for it to me when I first became a ranger, said iron was good protection in the mountains. Always thought it was just superstition. "Pete, step into the light." "Why would I do that, Sam? I can see fine from here." That's when I knew. The real Pete was afraid of the dark, had been ever since he was a kid. He never stood in shadows if he could help it, always positioned himself where his light could reach. This thing wearing Pete's face and voice wasn't Pete at all. I ran. Behind me, The thing that looked like Pete started laughing. Not Pete's laugh, something cold and hollow that echoed off the chamber walls like breaking glass. Then I heard it following me. But the footsteps weren't right. Too many of them, like multiple people walking in perfect unison. I reached the far wall of the chamber and found an opening, a narrow passage that led upward at a steep angle. I squeezed through and kept climbing, my lungs burning in the thin cave air. The passage opened into another chamber, smaller this time. My light revealed cave paintings on the walls, Cherokee symbols and figures, but also something else. Modern additions, drawn in what looked like charcoal. Stick figures arranged in groups, all facing a large shape in the center. The shape had no features, just a human outline filled with solid black. Below the drawings, someone had written in English, "It takes everything." That's when I heard my own voice calling from behind me. "Pete, where are you?" Pete. The thing had taken my voice now, using it to call for the real Pete. If Pete was still alive somewhere in this maze, he might answer. He might come running toward what he thought was me. I kept moving, following a passage that angled upward toward what I hoped was another entrance. The walls here were covered with more drawings, and I could see they told a story. Figures entering the cave, the hollow shape approaching them, the figures becoming hollow themselves, their faces empty circles. The last drawing showed the hollow figures walking out of the cave, back to the world above. My radio crackled suddenly, making me jump. Static at first, then voices, clear as day. "Cherokee National Forest, this is Ranger Cragmont. 3 cavers found safe, heading back to base." That was my voice on the radio. But I was right here, and I hadn't called anyone. "Copy that, Sam. Good work." Jenny's voice, responding to whatever was pretending to be me on the surface. I tried to key my own radio, but it was completely dead. No power, no static, nothing. But somehow, something else was using my voice, my call sign, reporting that the mission was complete. The passage curved again and opened into the biggest chamber yet. This one had a high ceiling covered with flowstone formations that looked like frozen waterfalls. And in the center of the chamber, sitting perfectly still, were 3 people, David Chen, Sarah Mills, and Robert Tucker. Our missing cavers. They were sitting in a circle, facing outward, just like their footprints in the mud. Their eyes were open, but they didn't blink. They didn't move at all. "David?" I called softly. "Sarah?" No response. I approached carefully, my light playing over their faces. They looked normal, uninjured, but something was missing from their eyes. Like looking at empty houses. I reached out and touched David's shoulder. His skin was ice cold, and he felt stiff as a board. But he was breathing. Slow, shallow breaths that barely moved his chest. "Can you hear me?" David's head turned toward me with a mechanical motion. His mouth opened, and my own voice came out. "Help us, Pete. We're lost in the cave. Something's hunting us." Sarah's head turned next, and she spoke in Pete's voice. "I'm coming, Sam. Stay where you are." Then Robert, in a voice I didn't recognize. "The Hollow Man is hungry. He needs what you carry inside." All 3 of them stood up at the kana, once moving like puppets on strings. Their eyes never blinked, never focused on anything. But they all turned toward me and started walking. I ran again, leaving the 3 hollow shells behind. But their voices followed me, calling out in dozens of different voices. Men, women, children, all speaking words that made no sense. The passage twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the mountain instead of toward the surface. I was lost completely now, running through tunnels that couldn't exist, past chambers that weren't on any map. And behind me, something was following. Not just the hollow cavers, but something else. Something that moved like flowing water over stone, making a sound like grinding bones. I could hear it getting closer. The passage ended at an underground river. The water was black as oil and moved without making a sound. On the far side, maybe 30 feet away, I could see another cave entrance. But the water was too deep to wade, too wide to jump. Behind me, the grinding sound was getting closer, along with the voices of the hollow cavers. I was trapped. That's when I heard the real Pete's voice, weak and echoing from somewhere across the water. "Sam, is that really you?" I shined my light across the river and saw him huddled against the far wall. The real Pete, not the thing that had copied him. He was hurt. I could see blood on his shirt, but he was alive. Pete, how did you get over there? Fell through a sinkhole about an hour ago. Broke my ribs, I think. There's something down here, Sam. Something that's not human. I know, I've seen it. It can copy us. Perfectly. How do I know you're really you? Good question. I thought for a moment, then called across the water. You were afraid of the dark until you were 12. Your brother locked you in the root cellar during a storm. Pete nodded. It's you. But Sam, you can't cross the water. It can't cross either. Been trying to get to me for an hell thing. Hour. Whatever this thing is, running water stops it. The grinding sound was right behind me now. I turned and saw it emerging from the passage, the thing the Cherokee had called the Hollow Man. It was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the darkness. Its face was human-shaped but wrong, features that were too sharp, too perfect, like someone had carved them from marble. But it was the eyes that made my blood freeze. Completely black, no iris, no pupil. Just empty holes leading to nothing. Samuel Cragmont, it said in my own voice. You have something I need. What do you want? What you carry inside, your memories, your voice, your face. It tilted its head with that mechanical motion I'd seen in the hollow cavers. I've been watching you for weeks, learning you. Soon I'll be you, and you'll be nothing. It started walking toward me, and I backed toward the water's edge. Behind the Hollow Man, I could see the 3 cavers, following. They moved in perfect unison, their empty eyes staring at nothing. Why? I asked, trying to buy time. This is my place, my domain. People come here, and they feed me. Their essence, their identity. I take what makes them human and add it to myself. The thing smiled with my face, but the expression was all wrong. I've been collecting for decades. Soon I'll have enough to walk in your world permanently. I looked at the black water flowing between me and Pete. The Cherokee had always said you couldn't cross running water if spirits were chasing you. Old superstition, but maybe. You want me? Come and get me. I jumped into the river. The water was shockingly cold, and the current was stronger than it looked. But as soon as I hit the water, I heard the Hollow Man scream, a sound like tearing metal that echoed through the cave system. The thing couldn't follow. It stood at the water's edge, reaching toward me with hands that stretched impossibly. Long, but it couldn't cross. The 3 hollow cavers stood behind it, waiting for orders that never came. I fought the current and made it to the far side, where Pete helped pull me out. You're bleeding, he said, looking at my hands. I looked down. The iron carabiner on my belt had cut my palm when I jumped, iron and blood mixing in the running water. The Hollow Man was furious now, pacing back and forth on the other side. But something was happening to it. The perfect features were melting, shifting, becoming less solid. The iron in my blood was poisoning the water, and the water was hurting the thing. It's weakening, Pete whispered. But the Hollow Man wasn't finished. It turned to the 3 hollow cavers and said something in a language I didn't understand. They walked to the water's edge and jumped in. Unlike their master, they could cross. But as soon as they hit the iron-tainted water, they started coming apart. Their copied faces melted away, revealing empty eye sockets and gaping mouths. They moved through the water like zombies, reaching for us with skeletal hands. The dynamite, Pete gasped. There's still some left from the old mining operations. Upper chamber. We ran, following a narrow passage that led upward. Behind us, the hollow things dragged themselves out of the water and followed, leaving trails of black liquid on the cave floor. The upper chamber was smaller, carved out by miners decades ago. In one corner, wrapped in oilcloth, were 3 sticks of old dynamite, still good, according to the markings. We collapsed this section, sealed the Hollow Man in, I said, checking the fuses. But we need to get out first. There's another passage. Leads to the old mine entrance, about half a mile from where we parked. We set the charges and lit the fuses. 30 seconds to get clear. Behind us, the hollow cavers reached the chamber. They moved faster now, desperate to stop us. One of them grabbed Pete's leg. As we squeezed through the escape passage, I turned back and kicked the thing in what used to be its face. My iron carabiner made contact, and the hollow caver dissolved like smoke. We ran through the narrow mine tunnel as the dynamite exploded behind us. The whole mountain shook, and rocks rained down from the ceiling. But we kept running until we saw daylight ahead. We emerged from the old mine entrance just as the sun was setting. The fog had lifted, and the mountains looked normal again. Peaceful, beautiful, safe. But as we walked back to our trucks, I noticed something wrong. My watch showed 6 p.m., but it had been morning when we entered the cave. We'd been underground for nearly 10 hours, but it felt like only 2 or 3. Time moved differently down there. In the Hollow Man's domain, the official report said we found the 3 cavers dead from hypothermia in a collapsed section of the cave. Tragic accident. Cave-in blocked the entrance, making recovery impossible. Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked why Pete and I both had gaps in our memory about what exactly happened down there. Nobody wondered why I threw away my iron carabiner the next day, even though it had belonged to my grandfather. Jenny Ashworth got transferred to a different district a week later. Said the mountains felt wrong to her after what happened. Pete took early retirement 6 months later. Moved to Florida, as far from cave country as he could get. Me? I stayed. Someone had to watch the mountains, make sure the entrance stayed sealed. I still patrol the Copper Creek area, still check the old mine entrance where we came out. The dynamite did its job. Tons of rock block the passage now. Nothing's getting out that way. But sometimes, on foggy mornings like the one when it all started, I hear things. Voices calling from deep in the mountains. Familiar voices, people I know, calling for help. I never answer. I never investigate. Because I learned something down there in the darkness. Something the Cherokee had known for centuries. There are places in these mountains that belong to things older than us. Things that hunger for what makes us human. The Hollow Man is still down there, trapped but not dead, waiting. And sometimes I wonder if he got what he wanted after all. See, I can't remember my wife's maiden name anymore. Can't recall our anniversary date, or the sound of her laugh. Pieces of me are missing, left behind in that dark place under the mountain. When I look in mirrors now, I have to check my eyes real careful. Make sure they're not completely black. Make sure there's still something human looking back. Most days, there is. But on the foggy mornings, when the voices call from the caves, I'm not so sure. The Cherokee were right about one thing. Some stories aren't just stories. They're warnings. And some warnings come too late. My name is Samuel Cragmont. I've been a ranger in Cherokee National Forest for 18 years. At least, I think I have. At least, I think I'm still me. My name is Robert Shadwick, and I've been watching these mountains for 12 years now. Fire Tower Observer, Monongahela National Forest, stationed up at Bear Rocks. That's 4,100 feet above sea level, perched on this steel tower like a bird in a cage. Been alone up here so long, I sometimes forget what my own voice sounds like. August of 1959 was hotter than blazes. Drought had the whole forest dry as old bones. And every day I'd scan the horizon with my binoculars, looking for that first wisp of smoke. Lightning was dancing across the mountains most nights, and I'd count the seconds between flash and thunder, marking down wind speeds and humidity readings in my logbook. I'd heard all the stories, of course. Old German settlers used to tell tales about shadow people in these mountains. Schattenmen, they called them. Shadow men who'd follow you through the woods, steal your reflection, leave you empty inside. Cabin fever stories, I figured. Too much time alone in the wilderness makes a man's imagination run wild. Should have listened closer to those old stories. The tower's my whole world up here. 80 feet of steel with a little glass room at the top where I work. Got my radio, my firefinder, those old military binoculars I brought back from Korea. Down below, there's a tiny cabin where I sleep, but most days I'm up in that glass box, watching, always watching. Tom Bradshaw comes by once a week with supplies. Good man, Tom. Been ranging these woods longer than me, knows every trail and creek. He's the only person I talk to most weeks, except for the radio check-ins with headquarters. This is Shadwick at Bear Rocks, all clear. Same words, twice a day, every day. The dolly sods stretch out below me like a moonscape. Strange place, all heath and bog and exposed rock. Cranberry bushes and mountain laurel growing wild between the stone formations. Wind never stops up here, and in the evenings, when the light hits just right, the whole plateau looks like something from another world. I like the quiet. After Korea, after all that noise and chaos, the silence up here feels like medicine. Sometimes I'll go hours without saying a word, just me and the wind and the birds. Ravens mostly, big black ones that like to sit on the tower and talk to each other. Smart birds, ravens, they watch everything, just like me. That's why I noticed when they stopped coming around. It was a Tuesday when the Garrett family went missing. Day hikers from Charleston, supposed to be back by evening. When they didn't show up at the parking area, the state police called it in. I spent the night scanning the trails with my binoculars, looking for flashlight beams or signal fires. Nothing but darkness and wind. The next morning, I climbed down from the tower to start a ground search. That's when I saw my shadow doing something strange. I was walking toward the trailhead, early morning sun throwing my shadow long across the rocks. Nothing unusual about that. But when I stopped to check my compass, my shadow kept walking. Just for a second, maybe two. Like it took a moment to realize I'd stopped moving. I stared at the ground for a long time, waiting for it to happen again. But shadows don't move on their own, do they? Must have been a cloud passing over the sun, or maybe the angle of light shifting through the trees. Had to be something logical. But deep down, in that part of my mind where all the old German stories lived, I knew I'd seen something that shouldn't be possible. The wind picked up, rattling the guy wires on my tower. Ravens were calling somewhere in the distance, but I couldn't see them, and my shadow, when I looked down at it again, seemed darker than it should be. Darker and somehow more solid than the rock beneath my feet. I headed back up the tower, telling myself it was nothing. Just too much time alone, too much sun, too much worry about those missing hikers. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me climb those 80 feet of steel steps. Something that lived in the shadows. The radio crackled to life around noon. Bear Rocks, this is headquarters. Any sign of those missing hikers? I pressed the transmit button. Negative. Headquarters. Scanned all visible trails this morning. No movement, no signals. Copy that. State police are organizing a ground search for tomorrow. Keep watching. I set the radio down and picked up my binoculars. The Dolly Sods trails spread out below me like a maze of brown lines through the green. Hikers used them every day during good weather, following the old paths between the rock formations and bog areas. That's when I saw him, a lone figure, maybe 2 miles out, walking along the northern trail. Male, average height, wearing a dark jacket. Nothing unusual except for one thing. His shadow was wrong. I adjusted the focus on my binoculars and looked again. The man was walking east, a morning sun behind him, but his shadow was falling to the wrong side. It should have been in front of him, long and dark on the trail. Instead, it stretched out to his left, like the sun was somewhere it couldn't possibly be. I blinked hard and looked again. Now the shadow was right where it should be, but as I watched, the man stopped walking and turned to look back down the trail. His shadow didn't turn with him. It stayed facing forward while the man looked backward. My hands started shaking. I set the binoculars down and rubbed my eyes. Too much sun glare, that's all. Heat waves rising off the rocks could play tricks with your vision. I'd seen it before, but when I looked again, the man was gone. Just empty trail stretching between the rocks. No sign he'd ever been there. I radioed headquarters. This is Bear Rocks. Think I spotted someone on the northern trail, but lost visual. Could be our missing hikers. Copy. Description? I started to answer, then stopped. What could I say? Man with a shadow that moved wrong? Male subject, dark clothing, approximately 2 miles north of my position. Lost him behind the rock formations. We'll check it out. Keep watching. The rest of the day passed quietly. Too quietly. Usually I'd see birds, squirrels, maybe a deer or two. But the whole area seemed empty. Like all the animals had decided to be somewhere else. Even the wind died down to nothing. As evening approached, I climbed down to the cabin for dinner. Opened a can of beans and heated them on my camp stove, listening to the radio chatter from other towers. Normal stuff. Weather reports, fire danger ratings, shift changes. I was washing my bowl when I heard footsteps on the tower ladder, heavy boots on steel rungs, climbing slow and steady. Tom wasn't due until Thursday, and nobody else had permission to be in this area. I stepped outside and looked up. Nobody there, just my tower reaching up into the darkening sky. But the footsteps kept going. Clang, clang, clang. Steady rhythm, like someone climbing toward the observation deck. I counted the steps. 40 rungs to the first platform, 40 more to the top. 80 steps total, same as always. The footsteps stopped at exactly 80. I grabbed my flashlight and started climbing. Maybe someone was in trouble, needed help. But when I reached the top, the observation deck was empty. Just my chair, my equipment, and the big windows looking out over the mountains. I checked the radio. Working fine. Tried calling headquarters, but all I got was static. Tried the other towers too, but nobody answered. Like I was the only person left in the world. That's when I saw the photographs. I always keep a camera up in the tower for documenting fires or unusual weather. Old 35mm with black and white film. I'd taken some pictures of the search area earlier, hoping to spot details I might have missed with the binoculars. The photos were spread out on my desk. Pictures I'd never taken. They showed the trail where I'd seen the lone hiker. But in these photos, there were people. Lots of people. Men, women, children, all walking along the trail in single file, all of them wearing old-fashioned clothes, like something from 50 years ago. And none of them had shadows. Every person in the photos was walking in bright sunlight, but the ground beneath their feet showed no trace of their presence. Like they were ghosts made of light, casting no darkness at all. I looked closer at one photo. A young woman in a long dress, carrying a baby. Her face was turned toward the camera, and her eyes were wide with terror. Behind her, a man in suspenders was pointing at something outside the frame. At the bottom of the photo, in my own handwriting, were the words, "They're coming back." I'd never written those words, never taken those pictures. But there they were, in my camera, developed in my darkroom, spread out on my desk like a message from somewhere else. Outside, the wind started picking up again. But it wasn't making the usual sounds. Instead of whistling through the guy wires, it sounded like voices, whispers in a language I couldn't understand. German, maybe. Old German, like the settlers would have spoken. I looked out the window toward the trail where I'd seen the lone hiker. The moon was rising, casting long shadows across the rocks. But the shadows were moving, shifting and flowing like water, reaching toward my tower like dark fingers. And somewhere in that mass of moving darkness, I could see shapes, human shapes, walking slowly but steadily up the mountain, coming for me. I didn't sleep that night. Sat up in the tower with my flashlight and radio, watching those shadows move across the landscape like a slow, dark tide. Every time I thought I was imagining things, I'd see another shape detach itself from the darkness and start climbing toward me. By morning, they were gone. Just normal shadows falling where they should, and birds singing in the distance. I almost convinced myself it had been a dream, until I checked my logbook. Someone had been writing in it. Pages and pages of entries in handwriting that looked like mine, but wasn't quite right. The letters were too sharp, too angular, like someone was trying to copy my style but couldn't get it perfect. Day 1, they found me. Day 2, can't tell which thoughts are mine anymore. Day 3, the shadow man showed me where the hikers went. Day 4, I understand now. The Germans were right. The dates went back 3 weeks. According to these entries, I'd been having encounters with shadow people for almost a month, but I couldn't remember writing any of it. The radio crackled. Bear Rocks, this is Tom Bradshaw. Coming up for supply drop. ETA, 2 hours. I grabbed the microphone. Tom, thank God. Something strange is happening up here. I need to. Static cut me off. When it cleared, Tom's voice came back, but different somehow. Flatter. Everything's fine, Robert. Nothing to worry about. Just stay in the tower and wait for me. I stared at the radio. Tom never called me Robert. Always used my last name, like we did in the service. And he'd never told me to stay anywhere. Tom was the kind of man who expected you to meet him halfway, help with the supplies. 2 hours later, I saw him coming up the trail. Same old Ford pickup, same Blue Ranger uniform. But something was off about the way he walked. Too smooth, like he was gliding instead of stepping. And his shadow was walking about 3 feet to his left. I climbed down to meet him, but stayed near the tower base. "Tom, you okay?" He looked up at me and smiled. Same face, same weathered features, but his eyes were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just empty darkness. "Everything's fine, Robert," that flat voice again. "Just need to check your equipment, make sure everything's fine, working properly." "Since when do you check my equipment?" Tom's smile got wider. Too wide. "Since the shadow people told me to. That's when I ran. I scrambled up the tower ladder faster than I'd ever climbed before." Behind me, I could hear Tom laughing, but it didn't sound like him anymore. It sounded like a dozen voices laughing at once, echoing off the rocks. I reached the observation deck and slammed the trapdoor shut, then dragged my desk over to hold it down. The radio was squawking with chatter from other towers, but when I tried to respond, all I got was that same flat voice. "Everything's fine, nothing to worry about." I looked out the windows. Tom was standing at the base of the tower, perfectly still. His shadow was moving around him in slow circles, independent of his body. As I watched, more shadows began emerging from the rocks and trees. Dozens of them, all human-shaped but too dark, too solid. They surrounded the tower like a crowd at a funeral. The photographs on my desk had changed again. Now they showed the missing Garrett family. Mother, father, 2 young children. But they were wrong, just like the other pictures. The family was standing together in bright sunlight, but their shadows were missing. And behind them, barely visible in the background, was my tower. Someone knocked on the trapdoor beneath my feet. "Robert?" Tom's voice, but normal now. "Let me up. I brought supplies." I didn't answer. The knocking got louder. "Robert, it's me. What's wrong with you?" But I could see Tom through the window. He was still standing at the base of the tower, still as a statue. Whatever was knocking on the trapdoor, it wasn't him. The knocking stopped. Then I heard footsteps on the outside of the tower. Impossible footsteps, walking up the steel legs like they were stairs. I pressed my face to the window and looked down. A shadow was climbing the tower. Not a person casting a shadow, but a shadow itself. A human-shaped absence of light, moving hand over hand up the steel framework. More shadows followed. They flowed up the tower like black water, surrounding the observation deck. I could feel them pressing against the windows, testing for weak spots. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost began forming on the inside of the glass. That's when I heard my own voice coming from outside. "This is Robert Shadwick," my voice said. "Fire Tower Observer, Monongahela National Forest. I've been up here 12 years, and I've never seen anything like this." I looked around the room. I wasn't talking. My mouth wasn't moving. But my voice continued outside, telling my story to an invisible audience. "The shadow people are real," my voice said. "They've been here all along, waiting in the spaces between light and dark, and now they want me to join them." One of the windows cracked. Not from pressure, but from cold. The frost was spreading, and through it I could see shapes moving. Human faces pressed against the glass, but made of nothing but darkness. I recognized some of them. The Garrett family, the woman with the baby from the photograph, and others, dozens of others, all staring at me with empty eye sockets that somehow still conveyed desperate hunger. The radio crackled one more time. My own voice came through the speaker. "This is my last transmission. If you're listening to this, stay away from the fire towers. The shadows are collecting people, and once they have your shade, you belong to them forever." I never said those words, but I knew, somehow, that they were true. The trapdoor started to buckle under my desk. Something was pushing up from below with impossible strength. And outside, the shadows had begun to merge, flowing together into one massive, human-shaped void that towered over my little glass room. The stalking shade had found me. The thing that rose up through my trapdoor wasn't Tom. It wore his face and his clothes, but it moved like liquid shadow poured into a human mold. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once. "You've been alone too long, Robert," it said. "We can fix that. We can make you part of something bigger." I backed against the windows, feeling the cold seeping through the glass. What are you? We are the spaces between, the shadow Tom replied. The darkness that defines the light. Every person who ever felt truly alone, we've been there. Waiting. It gestured toward the windows, where I could see the writhing mass of collected shadows. You're missing hikers. The German settlers who disappeared in these mountains. Lonely fire watchers going back decades. All of them chose to join us rather than face another day of isolation. That's not Tom, I said. Tom would never. Tom is safe, the thing interrupted. His body is down at the base of the tower, sleeping peacefully. We've borrowed his appearance to make this easier for you. But we can wear any face you need us to wear. The shadow Tom's features shifted, becoming my father. Then my drill sergeant from Korea. Then faces I'd half forgotten from childhood. All of them speaking with that same terrible, flat voice. You understand loneliness, Robert. You came to this tower to escape from people, but you've only made yourself more alone. We offer connection. Perfect unity. You'll never be isolated again. I looked out at the mass of shadows pressed against my tower. Up close, I could see that each one was different. Men, women, children, all reduced to human-shaped voids, but somehow still individual. Still aware. The hikers, I said. They're still conscious in there. They're part of something greater now. No more fear, no more doubt, no more crushing weight of being alone in an indifferent universe. Only belonging. The radio on my desk suddenly came to life with voices. Dozens of, for them, all speaking at once. Join us, Robert. It's peaceful here. No more watching. No more waiting. The loneliness ends now. I recognize some of the voices. Fire tower observers from other mountains. Rangers who disappeared over the years. All of them calling to me from inside that writhing darkness. What do you want from me? I asked. What you've always wanted, the shadow thing said. To matter. To be part of something important. To never have to face another sunset alone. It was true. Every word of it. 12 years in this tower, watching for fires that might not come. Talking to voices on the radio that barely knew my name. Going days without human contact, telling myself I preferred it that way. But I thought about Tom, the real Tom unconscious at the base of my tower. About the missing family, wherever they really were. About all the people who disappeared into this thing's collection. No, I said. The shadow thing tilted its head. No? I said no, I won't join you. The temperature dropped even further. The windows began to crack in earnest now. Spider webs of fractures spreading across the glass. You don't have a choice, the thing said, and now its voice was angry. We've been preparing you for weeks. Your shadow already belongs to us. Look. I looked down at my feet. There was no shadow beneath me. None at all. According to the laws of physics, I should have been casting a shadow in the bright afternoon sun streaming through the windows. But there was nothing. You see, the thing said, you're already partially here. 1 foot in each world. All that's left is to let go of the illusion that you're still fully human. That's when I understood. The logbook entries I couldn't remember writing. The photographs that appeared without my taking them. The voices on the radio. They'd been slowly taking pieces of me for weeks, preparing me for this moment. But they'd made one mistake. I looked around the observation deck, at all my equipment, the radio, the binoculars, the fire finder, and the emergency beacon. Every fire tower had one, a powerful light that could be seen for miles, used to signal aircraft or ground crews during emergencies. I'd never used it before, never had a reason to. You know what the old German stories said about shadow people? I asked. The thing paused, suspicious. What? They can't exist in complete light. I reached for the beacon switch. Or complete darkness. They need the boundary between the two. I flipped the switch. The beacon blazed to life with the power of 10,000 candles, flooding the observation deck with white-hot light. The shadow thing shrieked and began to dissolve, its borrowed features melting away like wax. Outside, the mass of collected shadows recoiled from the windows, pulling back into the forest. But I could still see them, writhing in the spaces between the trees, held at bay but not destroyed. The radio crackled with screams of rage and pain, dozens of voices crying out in languages I didn't recognize. The collected souls weren't free yet. They were still trapped, still bound to the thing that had taken them. I cranked the beacon to maximum power and pointed it down at the base of the tower. The light swept across the rocks like a searchlight, and wherever it touched, shadows fled. Tom's body was there, unconscious but breathing. But the shadows were regrouping. I could see them massing at the edge of the light's reach, waiting for the beacon to burn out or for me to turn it off. I had to do something permanent. I kept the beacon running all night, sweeping it back and forth across the forest. Every time the light touched the collected shadows, they screamed and pulled back. But they didn't disappear. They were waiting for me to weaken, to run out of power, to make a mistake. By dawn, the beacon was running low on battery power. The light was getting dimmer, and the shadows were creeping closer. I could see them at the edge of the tree line, testing the boundaries of the light. That's when Tom woke up. I watched him through the windows as he sat up slowly, shaking his head like he was trying to clear it. He looked around in confusion, then up at my tower. When he saw the beacon flashing, he scrambled to his feet and started climbing. "Robert," he called out, "what the hell's going on up there?" The real Tom. I could tell by his voice, by the way he moved. Whatever had worn his face the day before was gone, at least for now. I opened the trapdoor as he reached the top. "Tom, listen to me carefully. We need to get out of here. There's something in these woods, something that collects people's shadows." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Shadows? Robert, you've been alone up here too long. You're talking crazy." "Look at the forest," I said. "Really look." Tom turned to the windows and squinted into the dawn light. I saw his expression change as he spotted them, dark shapes moving between the trees, too black to be natural shadows, too purposeful to be anything but alive. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "What are those things?" "The stalking shade," I said. "That's what the old German settlers called it. It feeds on isolation, on people who spend too much time alone. It's been collecting shadows for over 200 years. The beacon flickered and dimmed. The battery was almost dead. "We need to go," I said. "Now, while there's still some light." We climbed down as fast as we could, Tom supporting me when my legs shook from exhaustion. At the base of the tower, I could see where the shadows had been. The ground was scorched in perfect human outlines, like atomic shadows burned into concrete. Tom's truck was still there, untouched. We threw ourselves inside and he gunned the engine, racing down the mountain road with the rising sun behind us. In the rearview mirror, I could see the shadows flowing back toward my tower like a dark tide. They didn't follow us into the full daylight, but I knew they were still there, waiting for the next lonely soul to wander into their territory. Tom drove me to the ranger station and called headquarters. I told them about the missing hikers, about the strange occurrences, about finding evidence of people in the forest who shouldn't have been there. I didn't mention the shadows. Who would believe that? They found the Garrett family 3 days later, wandering near the highway 20 miles away. No memory of where they'd been, no idea how they'd gotten so far from the trail. When the doctors examined them, they found something strange. The family cast no shadows for exactly 24 hours after they were found. I put in for a transfer immediately. Couldn't stand the thought of going back to that tower, of spending another night alone with those things waiting in the darkness. They stationed me at a busy campground instead, where there are always people around, always voices, always light. But I still check my shadow every morning when I wake up. Still watch to make sure it moves when I move, falls where it should fall. Because I know the truth now. We're all just one moment of isolation away from losing ourselves completely. The other fire towers in the region have been reporting strange incidents lately. Equipment malfunctions, missing time, observers requesting transfers after only a few weeks on the job. Headquarters thinks it's just the stress of the work, the psychological pressure of spending so much time alone. They're wrong. The stalking shade is still out there, moving from tower to tower, mountain to mountain, looking for people who've forgotten how to connect with others, who've chosen solitude over the messy complications of human relationship. I've started visiting the fire towers on my days off, bringing supplies and conversation to the Pyre Press, observers stationed there. Most of them think I'm just being friendly. A few of them understand. They've seen things they can't explain, felt presences they can't describe. I tell them the same thing I'll tell you. Watch your shadow. Make sure it stays where it belongs. And whatever you do, don't spend too much time alone. The darkness is always waiting for us to forget that we need each other. And it's getting stronger. My name is Margaret Brimstone, and I've been a ranger at Daniel Boone National Forest for 15 years. Before that, I was an Army medic in Vietnam. I've seen plenty of bad things in my life: pulled bodies out of car wrecks, treated soldiers with missing limbs, searched for lost hikers who didn't make it home. But I always figured the old mountain stories about things that eat more than food were just ways to explain cabin fever and starvation madness. I was wrong. It was March of 1982, and the winter thaw was making everything unpredictable. One day it would be 40 degrees with mud everywhere. The next we'd get a surprise snowstorm. The Weather Service kept putting out flash flood warnings because all that snow up in the mountains was melting fast. Radio chatter was full of reports about washed-out bridges and hikers getting trapped by sudden creek rises. That's when the call came in about the Rodriguez family. They were experienced winter campers from Louisville, UFL, parents, and 2 teenage kids who'd planned a 5-day backcountry trip through Clifty Wilderness. They had all the right gear, knew the area well, and had filed a proper trip plan. When they didn't show up at the Natural Bridge parking area on Sunday evening, their neighbors called it in. I grabbed my radio and rescue pack and headed out in the Jeep. The Rodriguez family had planned to camp near Sky Bridge, about 20 miles from Highway 27. It's beautiful country, sandstone cliffs rising 200 feet, natural arches carved by millions of years of water, thick rhododendron bushes that create tunnels you can walk through. But it's also easy to get lost. All those gorges look the same, and if you take a wrong turn, you can end up miles from where you think you are. I set up base camp at the Natural Bridge parking area and called in Deputy Sheriff Rick Pemberton and the County Volunteer Rescue Squad. Rick was a good man, steady and reliable, with 20 years of experience finding lost folks in these mountains. The volunteers were local people who knew every deer trail and creek bed for 50 miles. We started the search Tuesday morning, following standard grid patterns. The weather was cooperating, clear skies, temperature in the low 40s. Perfect conditions for a ground search. I led one team up the main trail toward Sky Bridge, while Rick took another group along the creek beds, where people sometimes got turned around. The first thing that struck me was how quiet the forest was. Usually in March, you hear birds everywhere, robins, cardinals, woodpeckers working the dead trees. But as we got deeper into the wilderness, the sounds just stopped. Not gradually, like when you're moving away from civilization. All at once, like someone had turned off a radio. "You notice how quiet it is?" asked Tommy Morrison, one of the volunteers. He was a local man who'd been hunting these woods since he was a kid. "Maybe the weather's got them." "Spooked," I said, but I didn't believe it. Animals know things we don't. When the forest goes completely silent, it usually means there's a predator around, a big one. We found their first campsite around noon. It was about 3 miles up the main trail, in a small clearing next to Rockbridge Creek. The site was clean, properly set up, with a fire ring made of local stones and their waste buried according to leave-no-trace principles. The Rodriguez family knew what they were doing, but something felt wrong about the place. The temperature seemed colder than it should be, even though we were in direct sunlight. I pulled out my thermometer and checked. 32 degrees, right at freezing. That was at least 10 degrees colder than it had been just a half-mile back down the trail. "Fresh snow," said Tommy, pointing to white patches around the fire ring. That stopped me cold. The Weather Service hadn't predicted any snow, and it was 40 degrees when we'd started the search. But there it was, maybe an inch of fresh powder, but only in a circle about 20 feet across. Outside that circle, the ground was just normal March mud. I radioed Rick to report what we'd found. The radio crackled with static, which was unusual for this area. Usually, we got clear communication from anywhere along the main trail. "Any sign of the family?" Rick's voice came through, broken up. "Negative. Clean campsite, but something's not right. Temperatures dropped about 10 degrees, and we've got fresh snow and 40-degree weather." "More static, then?" "Copy that. We're seeing some odd tracks down here. Can't identify the animal." We searched the area around the campsite for another hour, but didn't find any obvious trail leading away. The family had definitely spent at least one night there, but where they'd gone next was anybody's guess. I was starting to get a bad feeling in my stomach, the kind of unease that comes from 15 years of finding people who didn't want to be found. As we prepared to move on to the next search area, I noticed something else. My mouth was watering, and I felt hungry despite eating a full breakfast just 3 hours earlier. Really hungry, like I hadn't eaten in days. The feeling was so strong, it was hard to concentrate on the radio chatter from the other search teams. "You bring any extra food?" I asked Tommy. "Sure did. Want a granola bar?" I took it and ate it in 3 quick bites, barely tasting it. But the hunger didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. That should have been my first warning. But I was focused on finding the Rodriguez family, and I pushed the feeling aside. We had work to do, and people were counting on us. I wish I'd paid more attention to that hunger. Maybe things would have turned out different. We found the second campsite just before dark, about 2 miles deeper into the wilderness. This one was different. The tent was still standing, but the fabric had been shredded from the inside out. Long tears ran from floor to ceiling, like someone had taken a knife and slashed their way out. Sleeping bags were scattered around the clearing, ripped open with the stuffing blowing in the wind. But what really got my attention was the fire pit. It was huge, maybe 6 feet across instead of the normal 2-foot ring, and arranged around it in a perfect circle were bones. Not animal bones. I'd seen enough combat casualties to recognize human remains when I saw them. "Jesus Christ," whispered Tommy. He'd gone pale and was backing away from the fire pit. I keyed my radio. "Rick, we need you up here now. Bring the camera." The static was worse now, almost drowning out my transmission. But I could hear him responding, saying they were on their way. I walked around the campsite, being careful not to disturb anything. The bones were old, months or maybe years, not recent. They'd been arranged carefully, almost like decoration. Skulls, femurs, ribs, all placed with the kind of precision that suggested ritual or ceremony. But mixed in with the old bones were fresh ones, still pink with bits of meat clinging to them, and these were definitely human. My stomach clenched, but not with revulsion, with hunger. The smell of raw meat in the cold air was making my mouth water so much I had to keep swallowing. It was wrong, disgusting, but I couldn't stop the physical reaction. "Ranger Brimstone?" Tommy's voice sounded far away. "You okay?" I realized I'd been staring at the fresh bones for almost 5 minutes, and my hands were shaking. Not from cold or fear, but from something else. Something I didn't want to name. "I'm fine," I said, but my voice sounded strange even to me. "Let's secure the area and wait for backup." That's when we heard the sound. It started low, like wind through the trees. But there was no wind. The air was completely still. The sound got louder, higher, until it became a wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was the loneliest, hungriest sound I'd ever heard, like every empty stomach in the world crying out at the same time. Tommy dropped his pack and pulled out a hunting knife. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold it. What the hell was that? Before I could answer, the temperature dropped. Not gradually, all at once, like someone had opened a freezer door. Our breath came out in white puffs, and frost started forming on the metal parts of our equipment. The wailing stopped. In the sudden silence, we heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling the campsite, but I couldn't see anything moving in the trees. The footsteps were too heavy for a human, too rhythmic for a bear. They crunched through dead leaves and snapped twigs, but whatever was making them stayed just out of sight. "We need to get out of here," Tommy whispered. I wanted to agree, but something was keeping me rooted in place. The smell of the fresh bones was getting stronger, and my hunger was becoming painful. I found myself imagining what the meat would taste like, how it would feel to sink my teeth into something warm and bloody. The thought should have horrified me. Instead, it made my stomach growl. That's when I saw the tracks. They were in the soft mud near the destroyed tent, and they were impossible. Human-shaped, but too big, at least 18 inches long and 6 inches wide. The toes ended in what looked like claws, and they were pressed so deep into the ground that whatever made them had to weigh several hundred pounds. But the really disturbing part was that the tracks circled the campsite multiple times, getting closer to the fire pit with each circuit, like something had been pacing, working up the courage or hunger to approach. "Look at this," I called Tommy over. He took one look at the tracks and started backing toward the trail. That's not natural. That's not any animal I know. I knelt down to get a better look. The tracks were fresh, maybe a few hours old at most. And they weren't random. They formed a deliberate pattern, like a spiral leading from the tree line to the bone circle and back out again. My radio crackled to life. Margaret, this is Rick. We're about a quarter-mile from your position, but something's wrong with our compasses. They're all pointing toward you instead of north. I keyed the transmitter, but all that came out was static. That's when the footsteps started again. But this time, they were behind us, and they were getting closer. I turned around slowly, my hand moving to the .38 revolver on my belt. The forest looked normal, tall trees, rhododendron bushes, rocky outcroppings. But something was watching us. I could feel eyes on me, studying me, measuring me. The hunger was getting worse. I found myself looking at Tommy and wondering what he would taste like. The thought came unbidden, unwanted, but I couldn't push it away. I could almost see the muscle and fat under his skin, could imagine the warm blood flowing in his veins. Margaret? His voice was small, scared. Your eyes. What about them? They're different. Yellow. I blinked hard and shook my head. When I looked at him again, the hunger faded slightly, but it didn't go away. It was like a constant ache now, gnawing at my insides. We need to find Rick and get out of here, I said. But as we started back down the trail, I caught myself looking over my shoulder at the bone circle. Part of me, a part that was growing stronger by the minute, wanted to go back and take some of those fresh bones with me, just in case we got really hungry. We found Rick's team 3 hours later, but we almost didn't recognize them. They were huddled around a small fire in a clearing about a mile from the bone circle. 5 grown men, all experienced outdoorsmen, sitting close together like scared children. Their eyes kept darting to a tree line, and every few minutes one of them would get up and pace around the fire. Rick? I called out as we approached. He spun around, and I saw immediately that something was wrong. His face was gaunt, like he'd lost 20 pounds since morning. His cheeks were sunken, and his eyes had a wild, desperate look. Margaret, thank God. We need to get out of here. Now. What happened to your team? Jerry's gone. Rick's voice was shaky. He was on watch around midnight, and when we woke up, we found his sleeping bag torn to shreds. No sign of him anywhere. I looked around at the other men. They all had the same hollow-eyed look as Rick, and I noticed they were all chewing on something, sticks, pieces of leather, even their own fingernails, like they couldn't stop their mouths from moving. When's the last time you ate? I asked. This morning, said Bill Caskey, one of the volunteers. But I'm so hungry I can barely think straight. We all are. That's when I realized the feeling had been growing in me too. Despite the granola bar and the sandwich I'd eaten at lunch, my stomach felt completely empty. Worse than empty, it felt like it was eating itself from the inside out. We found evidence of the Rodriguez family, I told Rick. But there's something else going on here. Something wrong. Before he could respond, we heard the wailing again, closer this time, and definitely coming from multiple sources. The sound seemed to surround us, echoing off the cliff faces and bouncing through the gorges until we couldn't tell where it was coming from. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 30 seconds. Put the fire out, I ordered. What? No, we need the heat. Put it out now. Bill threw dirt on the flames, and we were plunged into darkness. The wailing got louder, and now we could hear movement in the trees around us. Lots of movement, like a whole pack of large animals circling our position. I pulled out my flashlight and played the beam across the tree line. Nothing. But the sounds continued. Branches breaking, leaves rustling, and underneath it all, a wet chewing noise that made my skin crawl. What are they eating? Whispered Tommy. I didn't want to think about it. That's when the smell hit us. Sweet and coppery, like fresh meat left in the sun. But instead of making me sick, it made my mouth water. The hunger doubled, tripled, until it was all I could think about. I caught myself taking deep breaths, trying to pull more of that smell into my lungs. Do you smell that? Rick asked. His voice had changed, gotten deeper and rougher. Yeah, said Bill. Smells. Good. We all stood there in the dark, breathing in the smell of death and decay, and every one of us was thinking the same thing. We wanted to find whatever was making that smell and eat it. The rational part of my mind was screaming warnings, but it was getting harder to hear over the hunger. I found myself stepping toward the tree line, following the scent like a bloodhound. "Margaret, stop." Tommy grabbed my arm. "Look at yourself." I looked down and realized I was holding my knife. I didn't remember drawing it. The blade was reflecting my flashlight beam, and in that reflection, I saw my own face. My eyes were definitely yellow now, and my teeth looked longer, sharper. "What's happening to us?" I asked. Before anyone could answer, something crashed through the underbrush about 50 yards away. Then another crash, and another. Whatever was out there was big, and there were several of them. "Run," I said. We ran. Through the dark forest, stumbling over rocks and fallen logs, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. Behind us, the crashing sounds got closer, and mixed in with them was a new sound. Laughter. High-pitched, wild laughter that didn't sound quite human. We ran for maybe 20 minutes before Rick stumbled and fell. When we stopped to help, pan him up, I realized we were lost. Nothing around us looked familiar, and my compass was spinning wildly, unable to find magnetic north. "Where are we?" panted Bill. I tried to radio our base camp, but got nothing but static. The GPS unit was showing impossible readings. According to it, we were somewhere in the middle of the Red River, which was 3 miles away. That's when we saw the light. It was coming from a clearing ahead of us, warm and yellow like a campfire. But as we got closer, I realized it wasn't a fire at all. It was coming from the eyes of things sitting around a circle. Human shapes, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms that hung down past their knees. Their skin was gray like old meat, and their eyes glowed with that same hungry yellow light I'd seen in my own reflection. And in the center of their circle was Jerry. He was alive but changed. His clothes were torn and bloody, and he was hunched over something on the ground, tearing at it with in his teeth. When he looked up at us, his face was smeared with blood, and his eyes had that same yellow glow. "Jerry?" Rick called out. Jerry smiled, showing teeth that had grown into fangs. "Come and eat," he said. "It's so good. You've never tasted anything so good." The tall gray things around the circle turned to look at us, and I could see they had been human once. Some still wore bits of clothing, remnants of hiking gear and camping equipment. But they'd been changed, transformed into something else. Something hungry. The largest one stood up. It had to be 12 feet tall, with ribs visible through its stretched skin and fingers that ended in black claws. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through dead leaves. "Join us," it said. "Feed with us. The hunger will stop when you become the hunger." And the terrible thing was, I wanted to. The smell of whatever Jerry was eating was driving me crazy with need. My whole body was shaking with the desire to run into that circle and tear into the warm meat with my teeth. I might have done it too if Tommy hadn't grabbed my hand. "That's not Jerry anymore," he whispered. "And that's not food." I looked closer at what Jerry was eating and felt my stomach lurch. It was human, fresh, still warm, but even knowing that, the hunger didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. We ran again, but this time we were being hunted. The creatures followed us through the forest, sometimes visible in the moonlight, sometimes just sounds in the darkness. They were herding us, driving us away from any path that might lead back to civilization. Every time we tried to turn south toward the highway, we'd hear them moving to cut us off. "They're playing with us," Rick gasped as we stopped to catch our breath in a small cave. I knew he was right. These things could have caught us hours ago if they'd wanted to. Instead, they were wearing us down, making us more desperate, more hungry, more willing to give in. The hunger was consuming all of us now. Bill had started gnawing on a piece of rope. Tommy was chewing his own fingernails until they bled. Rick kept staring at the rest of us with an expression I didn't like, and I was fighting the urge to look at them the same way. "We need food," Rick said. His voice had gotten deeper, more growling. "We'll find something when we get out of here," I told him. "When?" "It's been 8 hours, Margaret." 8 hours, and we're no closer to getting out than when we started. He was right. My radio was dead, the GPS was useless, and we were completely lost in country that should have been familiar. It was like the forest itself had changed, rearranged itself to keep us trapped. "There's food here," Bill said quietly. "Fresh food." We all turned to look at him. He was staring at Tommy with naked hunger in his yellow eyes. "Don't," I warned, but my own voice sounded weak. Because part of me was thinking the same thing. Part of me was wondering if human meat really tasted as good as it smelled. That's when I heard the voice. It came from outside the cave, speaking in a language I'd never heard before. But somehow, I understood every word. "Come out, Margaret Brimstone. You know what you are becoming. You know what you want." I crept to the cave entrance and looked out. The tall gray creature was standing in the moonlight, its yellow eyes fixed on mine. Up close, I could see that it had once been human too. There were still traces of humanity in its face, twisted and stretched but recognizable. "What do you want?" I called out. "To feed you. To complete your transformation. You have been breathing our hunger for hours now. You have tasted our need. Soon, you will be one of us, and the pain will stop." "What are you?" The creature smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "We are the Wendigo. We are the hunger that walks. We were like you once. Lost, starving, desperate. Until we learned that the only way to stop the pain was to become the pain." Behind me, I heard a scuffle. Rick had tackled Tommy and was trying to bite his throat. Bill was laughing, a high-pitched sound that wasn't human anymore. "Stop them," I begged the Wendigo. "Why? They are doing what comes naturally, what you will do soon. Look at your hands, Margaret." I looked down and saw that my fingernails had grown into claws. My skin was starting to turn gray, and I could feel my bones stretching, lengthening. "The transformation is almost complete," the Wendigo continued. "Soon you will hunt with us. Soon you will feed with us. The forest will provide all the meat you need. The Rodriguez family fed us for 3 days. But they were not enough. We are never enough. The hunger never stops, Margaret. It only grows." I realized what I had to do. The creature was standing about 10 feet away, confident that I was too far gone to resist. But it had made one mistake. It didn't know about my army training. I still had my service revolver, and I still had 5 rounds of ammunition. More importantly, I remembered what my Cherokee grandmother had told me about iron. Old stories, legends I'd dismissed as superstition. Maybe they weren't just stories. I drew my gun and fired 3 shots center mass. The Wendigo staggered backward, black blood spraying from the wounds. It looked down at the holes in its chest with surprise. "Iron bullets," I said. "Blessed by a Cherokee medicine man before I started this job." That was a lie. They were just regular bullets. But the Wendigo believed it, and sometimes belief is enough. It screamed, a sound like winter wind and breaking bones, and collapsed. The other creatures in the forest answered with screams of their own, and I could hear them crashing through the underbrush toward our position. I turned back to the cave. Rick was on top of Tommy, blood on his mouth. Bill was watching with hungry fascination. "Rick, stop!" I pointed the gun at him. He looked up at me with yellow eyes that weren't human anymore. "Join us, Margaret. It feels so good to finally feed." I put a bullet in his head. Bill lunged at me, but the transformation wasn't complete yet. He was still mostly human, still slow. I shot him too. Tommy was badly hurt but alive. His throat was torn, but he was conscious. "Can you walk?" I asked. He nodded weakly. The Wendigo screams were getting closer. I helped Tommy to his feet and we stumbled out of the cave. Behind us, the darkness was full of yellow eyes and the sound of claws on stone. We ran through the forest, guided only by moonlight and desperation. The hunger was still there, gnawing at my insides, but I fought it down. Every time I felt the urge to stop and feed, I thought about my daughters, about the oath I'd taken to protect people. It took us 6 hours to find the Red River. When we finally saw the water gleaming in the back dawn light, I almost cried with relief. "Can you swim?" I asked Tommy. He was barely conscious, but he nodded. We plunged into the icy water and started swimming across. The current was strong from the spring melt, and hypothermia hit us within minutes. But behind us on the bank, I could see the Wendigo pack gathered at the water's edge, unable to follow. Running water. Another old story that turned out to be true. We made it to the other side, just as the sun came up. Tommy collapsed on the bank, but he was breathing. I radioed for medical assistance and a hazmat team. When the rescue choppers arrived 2 hours later, I told them about a gas leak that had caused hallucinations. I told them about a pack of rabid animals that had killed the search team. I told them anything except the truth. Because who would believe the truth? They found the Rodriguez family 3 days later. What was left of them? The bodies were scattered across several different campsites, all showing signs of cannibalism. The official report blamed exposure and starvation madness. The families never learned the real truth. Tommy survived, but he was never the same. The throat wounds healed, but he couldn't eat meat anymore. Said it reminded him of things he wanted to forget. He moved to Florida 6 months later and never came back to Kentucky. As for me, they transferred me to desk duty after the psychological evaluation. The department shrink said I was suffering from survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress. He prescribed medication and therapy and told me the nightmares would fade with time. He was wrong about the nightmares. I can't trust my hunger anymore. Every time I feel my stomach empty, I remember that night in the forest. I remember how good the smell of blood and raw meat was, how much I wanted to join the circle and feed. Sometimes I catch myself licking my lips when I see a rare steak, and I have to leave the room. The worst part is the knowledge that they're still out there. Every winter, when food gets scarce and people get desperate, there are reports. Hikers disappearing in the backcountry, campsites found with evidence of cannibalism, strange tracks in the snow that don't match any known animal. The Forest Service investigates, but they never find anything. They write reports about exposure and animal attacks and dangerous wildlife. But I know what's really happening. The Wendigo are feeding. Sometimes I drive out to the edge of Clifty Wilderness and stand at the trailhead, listening. When the wind is right, I can still hear them calling to each other across the gorges. That same hungry wailing that haunted our search for the Rodriguez family. And sometimes, late at night when my own hunger gets too strong, I think about answering that call. The transformation never fully stopped, you see. I can feel it in my bones, in the yellow tinge that sometimes creeps into my eyes. The Wendigo touched. Something inside me that night planted a seed of their hunger that grows a little stronger every winter. I've managed to fight it off so far. But I'm getting older, and the hunger is getting stronger. How long before I can't resist anymore? How long before I become what I once hunted? Last week, a family of 4 went missing in the Red River Gorge area. The search team found their campsite abandoned, with signs of a struggle. They asked me to consult on the case, share my expertise. I told them I was retired. But I know I'll have to go back eventually. When the hunger gets too strong, when I can't trust myself around other people anymore, I'll drive out to that trailhead one last time. Maybe I'll fight them again. Maybe I'll try to stop them from taking more families. Or maybe I'll finally stop fighting and join the pack. Either way, the hunger will end. The forest is patient. It can wait, and so can I. For now, my name is Eleanor Rockbridge, and I've been a geological survey ranger at Jefferson National Forest for 11 years now. People always ask me about the name Rockbridge, like it was meant to be, working with stones and mountains my whole life. Maybe it was. I got my master's degree in geology from Virginia Tech back in '65, and I've been studying these Appalachian mountains ever since. Most folks think being a ranger means I just check camping permits and put out fires, but my real job is protecting the mineral rights in these mountains. I make sure nobody's digging where they shouldn't, and I study the rock formations that make this place special. I live alone in a cabin about 18 miles from the nearest town, up in the Mount Rogers area. It's quiet up here, especially in September when the leaves start changing and the tourists head home. The elevation is 5,700 feet, which means we get fog rolling in most mornings, thick enough to lose yourself in. I never believed in the old Cherokee stories about singing stones. My Cherokee guide, Mary Sequoia, would tell me tales about rocks that called people to their deaths, but I always figured it was just wind blowing through the formations. When you understand geology like I do, you know rocks don't sing. They're just minerals and crystals formed over millions of years. Nothing magical about it. That was before September 15th, 1976. The first call came in around dawn. A hiker named James Morrison had fallen from Wind Rock, One of the granite outcroppings in the Grayson Highlands. Experienced climber, they said. Been hiking these mountains for 20 years. Found dead at the bottom of a 200-foot drop. I loaded my geological survey equipment into the truck and drove up the winding forest roads. My job was to check if there were any geological hazards, loose rocks, unstable ground, anything that might have caused the fall. Standard procedure when someone dies in the mountains. The fog, there was thick that morning, rolling between the granite peaks like something alive. I could barely see 10 feet ahead as I hiked to where they found Morrison's body. The granite formations up there are ancient, some of the oldest rock in Virginia, shaped into natural amphitheaters by millions of years of wind and weather. When I reached the fall site, something felt wrong. Not wrong in a supernatural way, wrong in a geological way. I've studied these rocks for over a decade, and I know every formation, every crack, every safe path. The place where Morrison fell was nowhere near the dangerous areas. The granite was solid, the trail was clear, and there weren't any obvious hazards. I checked my equipment, brunt and compass for direction, rock hammer for samples, pH testing kit for the soil, everything normal. But when I knelt to examine the rock face where Morrison must have slipped, I noticed something odd. There were tiny granite particles scattered around the area, too small to see, unless you knew what to look for. Almost like powder. I collected samples in my field bag and made notes in my logbook. The weather had been perfect for hiking, no rain, no ice, no reason for someone to lose their footing. And Morrison's body, the rescue team mentioned, he looked peaceful. No expression of fear or panic, like you'd expect from someone falling to their death. I spent the morning taking photos with my camera and measuring the distances. The scientific part of my brain cataloged everything. Wind, direction, temperature, humidity, rock composition. But there was something else, something I couldn't put in my notes. The silence felt wrong. Not just quiet, every forest has quiet moments. This was different, like the mountain was holding its breath, waiting for something. Even the birds seemed to avoid this area. I'd been standing there for 2 hours and hadn't heard a single chirp or rustle. I finished my survey and hiked back to the truck, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Not an animal I know, animal presence. This felt like the rocks themselves were paying attention. That evening, I sat in my cabin, reviewing my notes and developing the film from my camera. The photos showed the granite formations clearly, but there was something strange about them. In several shots, the rock faces seemed to have patterns I hadn't noticed while I was there, almost like mouths. Open mouths. I told myself it was just the shadows and the fog playing tricks with the camera. Rocks don't have mouths. They don't sing, and they don't watch you. But as I fell asleep that night, I could swear I heard something faint in the distance. Something that sounded almost like humming. The second hiker died 3 days later. Sarah Chen, a music teacher from Richmond, found at the bottom of the same cliff, in almost the exact same spot as Morrison. The call came in just after sunrise, and I was back up in the mountains, before the fog lifted. This time, I wasn't alone. Dr. William Stonefield, the park's chief geologist, drove up from the main office to help with the investigation. Bill and I had worked together before. He's good at his job, methodical, doesn't jump to conclusions. 2 experienced hikers in 3 days, Bill said as we examined the scene. That's not normal. I showed him the granite particles I'd found at Morrison's fall site. Under his magnifying glass, they looked even stranger, too perfectly uniform, like they'd been ground by something with mathematical precision. What kind of geological process could create particles this fine? I asked. Bill frowned, turning the sample bag in the morning light. I've never seen anything like this. It's like the granite was vibrated apart at a molecular level. We spent hours examining the rock face. Bill brought sensitive equipment, seismic detectors, acoustic measuring devices, tools I didn't usually need for routine surveys. As we worked, I started noticing things I'd missed during my first visit. The granite formations weren't random. They formed a natural amphitheater, with 5 connected peaks arranged in a nearly perfect circle. In the center, where both hikers had fallen, the acoustics were unusual. When Bill dropped his rock hammer, the sound echoed for much longer than it should have. "Try this," Bill said. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out across the formation. "Hello." The echo came back, but it sounded different, clearer, almost musical. That's not normal echo behavior, I said. No, it's not. Bill checked his acoustic equipment. The readings don't make sense. It's like the rock is amplifying certain frequencies and dampening others. We were so focused on the instruments that we almost missed what happened next. The humming started so softly I thought it was wind through the rock formations. But as we stood there in the granite amphitheater, the sound grew clearer. It wasn't wind, it was voices. Human voices, singing in perfect harmony. Bill's head snapped up. Do you hear that? Yeah. My throat felt dry. Where's it coming from? We looked around the amphitheater, but we were alone. The singing seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the granite walls. Beautiful voices, more beautiful than anything I'd ever heard. They sang without words, just pure melody that made my chest feel warm and light. We need to get out of here, I said, but my feet wouldn't move. The music was so lovely, so perfect. Part of me wanted to stay and listen forever. Bill was staring at the largest granite peak, his eyes unfocused. It's incredible, he whispered. It's like they're calling to us. That's when I realized we were both walking forward, toward the center of the amphitheater, toward the cliff edge where Morrison and Chen had fallen. I grabbed Bill's arm. Stop! The singing cut off abruptly, leaving us in complete silence. Bill blinked and looked around, confused. What just happened? He asked. We were walking toward the cliff. No, we were just standing here examining the... He trailed off, looking at his equipment. How long have we been here? I checked my watch. It was past noon. We'd arrived at 8 in the morning, but I could only account for about 2 hours of work. We'd lost 3 hours somehow. We need to leave, now. We packed our equipment quickly and hiked back down the mountain. Neither of us spoke much on the way down, but I could tell Bill was as shaken as I was. Whatever we'd experienced up there, it wasn't natural. That night, I called Mary Sequoia. She's lived in these mountains her whole life, and her grandmother had told her stories about the old Cherokee sites. If anyone would know about singing stones, it would be Mary. Eleanor, she said when I described what happened. You went to the forbidden place. What forbidden place? My grandmother called it the Stone Singers. The Cherokee knew to stay away from those rocks. They said the spirits of ancient singers lived there, trapped in the granite, always hungry for new voices to join their chorus. Mary, you know I'm a scientist. I don't believe in ... You heard them sing, didn't you? I was quiet for a long moment. Yes. Then you better start believing. And you better stay away from that place, or you'll end up like those hikers. The Stones are always looking for people who love music, who can appreciate beauty. They call to them, show them perfect harmony, make them want to join the eternal song. After I hung up, I sat in my cabin listening to the night sounds. But underneath the crickets and owl calls, I could swear I heard something else. Something that sounded like distant singing, calling my name. I should have stayed away. Mary warned me, Bill warned me, every instinct I had warned me. But I'm a scientist, and scientists don't run from phenomena they can't explain. I went back the next morning, alone. The fog was thicker than usual, rolling between the granite peaks like fingers reaching for something. As I hiked up the trail, I noticed the forest was completely silent. No birds, no insects, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, like the mountain was absorbing sound. I set up my equipment in the amphitheater and began systematic measurements. Temperature, humidity, air pressure, magnetic readings. I was determined to find a scientific explanation for what Bill and I had experienced. The acoustic readings were impossible. My instruments showed sound waves bouncing between the granite formations in patterns that defied physics. The rock faces seemed to be focusing and amplifying certain frequencies while completely absorbing others. I was so absorbed in my work that I didn't notice when the singing started again. This time, it began with my name. Eleanor? The voice was soft, beautiful, coming from the granite wall to my left. Eleanor Rockbridge. I looked up from my instruments. The fog had thickened around the amphitheater, but through it, I could see shapes in the rock face. Not just shadows, actual faces, carved in living stone, mouths moving as they sang. Eleanor, come closer. The voice was joined by others. A chorus of perfect harmonies calling my name, singing melodies that seemed to reach directly into my heart. I found myself walking toward the granite wall, my equipment forgotten. You understand beauty, the voices sang. You study the bones of the earth. Join us, Eleanor. Sing with us forever. The granite face began to glow with soft, internal light. I could see them now, the singers trapped in the stone. Dozens of faces, maybe hundreds, all singing in perfect unison. Their eyes were closed in rapture, their mouths open in eternal song. I recognized one of the faces. James Morrison, the first hiker. His features were carved in granite now, but it was definitely him. Beside him, Sarah Chen, both of them singing with the ancient chorus. It's beautiful here. Morrison's stone lips moved. No pain, no fear, just music forever. Join us, Eleanor. I was 3 feet from the cliff edge when I realized what was happening. The same thing that had happened to Morrison and Chen. The same thing that had almost happened to Bill and me. I forced myself to stop walking, to cover my ears, but the singing wasn't coming through my ears anymore. It was inside my head, vibrating through my bones, turning my skeleton into a tuning fork. No, I whispered, then louder. No. The singing stopped, and the granite faces faded back into ordinary rock. But I could feel their presence, watching, waiting. They knew I'd be back. I gathered my equipment and ran down the mountain. The third hiker died that evening. His name was David Reeves, a composer from Nashville who'd come to the mountains looking for inspiration. The park rangers found him the next morning in the same place as the others, but this time there was something different. This time there were witnesses. A group of college students had been camping nearby. They told the rangers they'd heard the most beautiful singing coming from the granite formations. 3 of them had started walking toward the sound in the middle of the night, but their friends had stopped them. It was like they were sleepwalking, one student told me. But they were awake, just empty, like the music had taken away their will. I interviewed all 6 students. They described the same thing Bill and I had experienced, perfect harmonies that seemed to call specifically to them. Voices that knew their names, an irresistible urge to walk toward the cliff. The weird thing, one girl said, is that I recognized one of the voices. It sounded like my grandfather who died last year. He used to sing me lullabies. That's when I understood. The stone singers weren't just trapping random hikers. They were choosing people who loved music, who had emotional connections to singing, who would be most susceptible to their call. And they were getting stronger. I called Bill and told him about the third death. We need to get the Park Service to close this area, I said. With what evidence? Singing rocks? Eleanor, we can't even explain what happened to us up there. People are dying, Bill, I know. But if we report this as a supernatural phenomenon, they'll take us off the case and bring in someone else. Someone who might not understand what we're dealing with. He was right. I'd built my career on scientific credibility. If I started talking about ghost singers in the rocks, I'd be laughed out of the geological survey. But that night, as I sat in my cabin trying to figure out what to do, the singing started again. Not faint and distant, this time. Right outside my window. Eleanor. The voices were clearer now, closer. You can't run from us forever. You feel the pull, don't you? The need to understand, to be part of something greater. I looked out the window and saw them glowing figures standing in my yard, made of granite and light. They were beautiful, ethereal, singing with voices that promised eternal peace and perfect harmony. You've studied our bones for 11 years, they sang. You know us better than anyone. You belong with us. I closed my eyes and pressed my hands over my ears, but the singing continued inside my head. Images flashed through my mind, visions of cosmic music, of understanding the fundamental harmonies that held the universe together, of joining voices that had been singing since the mountains were young. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in my front yard in my pajamas, walking toward the glowing figures. I was 50 feet from my cabin and couldn't remember leaving it. The stone singers smiled and reached out their hands. Come home, Eleanor. Come home to the mountain. This time, it took everything I had to turn around and run back inside. I called Mary Sequoia at dawn. They came to my house, I told her. I was sleepwalking toward them. The binding is getting stronger, Mary said. Every person they take makes the chorus more powerful. Soon they'll be able to reach anywhere in these mountains. How do I stop them? There was a long silence. My grandmother's stories said the stone singers were Cherokee people who made a pact with the mountain spirits. They wanted to preserve their songs forever, so they bound their voices to the granite. But the binding trapped them. They can't rest until they have enough voices to complete their eternal song. How many voices do they need? No one knows. They've been collecting singers for 200 years. There has to be a way to break the binding. Maybe, but Eleanor, you'd have to destroy the granite formations that anchor their spirits. The whole amphitheater. And if you're wrong, if you're just going crazy from isolation and stress, I'd be destroying a sacred Cherokee site for nothing. Yes. I spent the morning hiking up to the amphitheater one last time. If I was going to do this, I needed to be sure. I needed proof that what I was experiencing was real and not just a geological researcher having a breakdown. The singing started before I reached the stone circle. This time, it was different. More urgent, more commanding. The stone singers knew I was coming. Eleanor, they called. Our sister, our student of stone. Why do you fight us? I set down my pack in the center of the amphitheater and looked up at the granite faces. In daylight, they were clearly visible. Now dozens of human faces carved in living rock, all singing in perfect harmony. Because you're killing people, I said out loud. We're giving them eternal life, the chorus replied. Freedom from pain, from loneliness, from the silence of death. Listen. They began to sing a melody so beautiful it brought tears to my eyes. It was every lullaby I'd ever heard, every song that had ever moved me, every musical phrase that had ever made me feel less alone. The harmonies built layer upon layer, showing me mathematical relationships in sound that I'd never imagined. You see, they sang, this is what we offer, perfect understanding, complete communion. Your geological studies have been preparation for this moment, learning to read the language of stone so you could join our eternal song. I felt my feet moving toward the cliff edge again. Part of me wanted to join them. The scientist in me was fascinated by the impossible acoustic phenomena. The lonely part of me, the part that lived alone in the mountains with only rocks for company, craved the connection they offered. You belong with us, Morrisons, Granite Face said. You've always belonged with us. I was 10 feet from the edge when I remembered the dynamite in my pack. As a geological survey ranger, I carried small explosives for emergency rockslide clearing. Not enough to level a mountain, but enough to disrupt rock formations if necessary. The stone singers realized what I was thinking at the same moment I reached for my pack. No. The chorus turned into a shriek that shook the entire amphitheater. You cannot. We are eternal. We are sacred. But I was already running toward the central granite pillar, the one that seemed to anchor the whole formation. The singing became desperate, frantic, as granite faces emerged from every rock surface, all screaming at me to stop. Eleanor, please, don't condemn us to silence. Don't break the music. I planted the charges at the base of the central pillar and ran for cover. The stone singers' voices rose to an impossible crescendo, a wall of sound that made my ears bleed and my vision blur. We only wanted to sing forever, they wailed. We only wanted beauty to survive. I triggered the detonator. The explosion split the central pillar down the middle. The other granite formations cracked and shifted as their acoustic relationships were disrupted. The perfect amphitheater that had focused and amplified the singing for 2 centuries collapsed into a pile of broken stone. The screaming stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat, my ragged breathing, the normal sounds of wind through broken rock. The supernatural quiet was gone, replaced by ordinary mountain acoustics. I looked at the rubble where the stone singers had lived for 200 years. No more faces in the rock, no more perfect harmonies, just granite fragments scattered across the mountain. But as I walked through the debris, I found something that made my blood run cold. Embedded in one of the largest chunks of granite was a clear impression of to a human face. Morrison's face, frozen in stone with his mouth open in an eternal, silent scream. They weren't gone. They were just quiet. The official report said there had been a rock slide caused by geological instability. I filed the paperwork, collected my samples, and recommended the area be closed to hikers indefinitely due to safety concerns. Bill never asked me what really happened up there. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe he figured out enough on his own. We worked together for 3 more years before he transferred to another forest. We never talked about singing rocks again. The hearing damage from the explosion was permanent. The doctors said I'd lost about 30% of my hearing in both ears, and I developed tinnitus that would never go away. But the tinnitus isn't just ringing. Sometimes, late at night, I can hear faint echoes of the Stone Singers chorus, just whispers of melody, like music heard through water. I live with the guilt of destroying a sacred Cherokee site. Mary Sequoia said her grandmother would have understood that protecting the living was more important than preserving the dead. But I still wonder if there might have been another way, some solution that didn't require dynamite and cultural vandalism. The strange thing is, the other hikers stopped. After the explosion, no one else fell from that cliff. No one reported hearing singing from the rocks. The missing persons reports from the Mount Rogers area dropped to normal levels. But I started noticing things in other parts of the forest. Granite formations with unusual acoustic properties. Places where the bird song sounded too perfect, too harmonious. Areas where hikers reported feeling drawn to cliff edges or deep ravines. The Appalachian Mountains are full of ancient rock formations. Who knows how many other stone singer colonies might be out there, waiting for the right voices to complete their eternal choruses. I still work for the Geological Survey, but my focus has changed. I spend most of my time now cataloging and studying natural amphitheaters, unusual acoustic formations, and places where Cherokee oral traditions mention musical spirits. I've identified 17 sites in Virginia alone that show similar geological patterns to the destroyed amphitheater. The Park Service thinks I'm researching acoustic tourism opportunities. They don't need to know the real reason I'm mapping every singing rock in the Appalachians. Sometimes I get reports of hikers hearing beautiful music from various granite formations throughout the forest. I always investigate personally. So far, I've found 3 sites that showed early signs of stone singer activity. Small explosions, carefully placed, rock slides caused by geological instability. I keep a larger supply of dynamite in my truck now. The thing that scares me most isn't the supernatural entities themselves. It's how appealing they made their offer. Sound, complete understanding, eternal harmony, freedom from loneliness and death. Even now, knowing what I know, part of me misses the perfect beauty of their song. On quiet nights in my cabin, when the tinnitus is just the right pitch, I can almost hear them calling across the mountains. Stone singers in formations I haven't found yet, building their choruses voice by voice, waiting for someone who loves music enough to join their eternal song. I've learned to sleep with earplugs and the radio on, just in case, because the mountains are old and they have long memories. And somewhere in the granite bones of the Appalachians, the stone singers are still trying to complete their ancient chorus. And every time I hear a perfect harmony in the wind through the rocks, I have to resist the urge to follow the music home. My name is Michael Tearstone, and I've been a forest ranger at Pisgah National Forest for 16 years. I have a PhD in botany, which sounds fancy, but really it just means I know a lot about plants. Most days, I spend my time hiking through the woods around Looking Glass Rock, checking on rare flowers, and making sure nobody's hurting the forest. I'm 39 years old, and my life isn't going so great right now. My wife left me 6 months ago. She said I cared more about dead leaves than living people. Maybe she was right. These days, I spend most of my time alone in the mountains, and that's how I like it. Plants don't argue with you or break your heart. Looking Glass Rock is this huge granite dome that sticks up 4,000 feet into the sky. It's about 15 miles from the main road, so not many people make the tough hike to get there. The Cherokee people used to say it was a sacred place where the mountain cried for the dead. I always figured that was just old stories, explaining why water runs down the rock face. It was October when things started getting weird. The leaves were turning all those pretty fall colors, red, orange, yellow, and it had been raining a lot. Everything should have been perfect for the plants I was studying. But they weren't doing well. I was checking on some rare mountain laurel that only grows in a few spots around Looking Glass Rock. These plants were special. They'd been there for hundreds of years, and I was supposed to protect them. But when I got to their usual spot, something was wrong. The leaves were brown and droopy, like they were dying. But that didn't make sense. The soil was good, they had plenty of water, and it wasn't too hot or cold. I knelt down and touched the dirt around the roots. It felt normal, but it tasted salty when I licked my finger. That was strange. Mountain streams are supposed to be fresh water. I pulled out my notebook and wrote down what I saw. Then I heard something that made me stop writing. It sounded like someone crying, but very far away. I looked around, but I was alone. The sound seemed to be coming from the rock face itself. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed back, but nobody answered. I shook my head and went back to my work. Maybe it was just wind through the rocks, or maybe I was more lonely than I thought. But as I worked, I kept hearing it. Soft crying sounds, like someone was very sad. And I started feeling sad too, even though I didn't know why. My chest felt heavy, and my eyes began to water. I wiped my face and packed up my equipment. I'd been spending too much time alone in the woods. Maybe I needed to talk to other people more. As I hiked back toward my truck, I noticed something else strange. There were no animals around. Usually, I'd see squirrels and birds and deer. But today, the forest was quiet, except for that distant crying sound. When I got home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the dying plants. In 16 years of doing this job, I'd never seen healthy plants just start dying for no reason. And I couldn't get that crying sound out of my head. I called my supervisor and told him about the plants. He said to come back tomorrow with soil samples and take pictures of everything. Maybe there was some kind of pollution or disease. But deep down, I was starting to think this was something different, something I couldn't explain with science. The next morning, I hiked back to Looking Glass Rock with my camera and soil testing kit. The crying sounds started as soon as I got close to the granite dome. This time, they were louder. I tried to ignore them and focus on my work. I took pictures of the dying plants and collected soil samples in little plastic bags. When I tested the soil with my pH kit, everything looked normal. But when I tasted the water from the nearby stream, it was definitely salty. That's when I saw the first grave. It was just a small pile of rocks with no headstone or marker. The rocks looked old, covered with moss and lichen. I almost walked right past it, but something made me stop and look closer. There were more graves, lots of them, hidden under bushes and behind trees, scattered all around the area where my plants were dying. Some were just piles of rocks, others were sunken spots in the ground. None of them had names or dates. I counted 23 graves in a space about the size of a football field. How had I never noticed them before? I'd been working this area for years. I got out my camera and started taking pictures. That's when things got really weird. In the first photo, everything looked normal. But in the second one, there was a person standing next to one of the graves. A woman in an old-fashioned dress, pale and sad-looking. I looked up from my camera, but nobody was there. I looked at the camera again. The woman was gone from the picture too. My hands started shaking. I took another photo of the same spot. This time, there were 3 people standing by different graves. An old man, a young boy, and someone in what looked like a military uniform. When I looked up, the area was empty. "This is crazy," I said out loud. My voice sounded small in the quiet forest. The crying sounds got louder. Now they seemed to be coming from all around me, from the rocks, from the trees, from the graves themselves. And I started crying too. Not little tears, but big sobbing cries like someone I loved had just died. But I wasn't sad about anything specific. It felt like I was crying for people I'd never met, for deaths that happened long ago. I tried to stop, but I couldn't. The sadness was too strong. It felt like the weight of 100 funerals pressing down on my chest. I stumbled away from the graves, still crying. As I got farther away, the sadness got a little better, but it didn't go away completely. Something was very wrong with this place. When I got back to my truck, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, trying to understand what had happened. I'd been dealing with depression since my divorce, but this was different. This sadness didn't feel like mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those people in the photos. The sad woman, the old man, the boy, the soldier. They looked like they were waiting for something. I decided to do some research. I drove to the library in town and looked up the history of Looking Glass Rock. What I found made my stomach feel sick. During the Civil War, there had been a field hospital near the rock. Lots of soldiers died there from wounds and disease. The library had records showing that many bodies were buried in unmarked graves because there was no time for proper funerals. Then, in the early 1900s, there was a logging camp in the same area. 20 workers died in an accident when a makeshift bridge collapsed. The article said their bodies were interred locally, but didn't give details about where. And long before any of that, the Cherokee people had used the area as a mourning ground, a place where they came to cry for their dead, all those people buried without proper markers or ceremonies. No wonder the place felt so sad. But that still didn't explain why my plants were dying, or why I could see people in my photos, or why the water tasted like tears. As I drove home, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I was going back to find out what was really happening at Looking Glass Rock. Even if it scared me. I called in sick to work the next day. I couldn't explain to my boss that I needed to investigate supernatural crying sounds. Instead, I drove back to Looking Glass Rock on my own time, bringing more equipment, my GPS unit, extra film for my camera, and a tape recorder. The crying started before I even got out of my truck. It was louder than before. And now it sounded like many voices instead of just one. Men, women, children, all crying together like they were at the world's saddest funeral. I walked back to the area with all the graves. In the daylight, I could see them more clearly. Some had rotted wooden crosses, others were just piles of stones. A few had metal objects sticking up. Old belt buckles, buttons, things that don't rot away. I started recording everything with my tape recorder. This is Michael Tearstone, October 15th, 1988. I'm documenting unmarked graves near Looking Glass Rock. But when I played the tape back, my voice was almost drowned out by crying sounds. Loud, clear, sobbing that my ears could barely hear, but the recorder picked up perfectly. I took more photos. Every single picture had people in it now. Dozens of them, standing by graves or sitting on rocks or walking between the trees. Old people, young people, children, all of them looked sad and lost. Some were wearing Civil War uniforms. Others had on work clothes from the logging days. A few were dressed in Cherokee clothing. But they all had the same expression, like they were waiting for someone to notice them. I tried talking to them. Hello? Can you hear me? The crying got quieter for a moment, like they were listening. Then, one of them, a young man in a soldier's uniform, pointed at a grave near my feet. When I looked down, I could see fresh flowers on it, flowers that definitely weren't there yesterday. I knelt down and brushed away some leaves. There was a piece of metal buried in the dirt, a dog tag from the Civil War era. The name was too worn to read, but I could make out the year, 1864. When I looked up, the soldier was gone. But now there was a Cherokee woman standing by another grave. She was pointing too, at a spot where I could see the corner of something wooden sticking up from the ground. I spent the next 4 hours digging up objects from different graves. Dog tags, jewelry, pieces of tools, even some old photos in tin frames. Each grave had something to identify who was buried there. But the more I dug, the sadder I felt. By afternoon, I was crying so hard I could barely see. It wasn't my sadness, it was theirs. All those people who died far from home, who never got proper funerals, who never had anyone to mourn for them. I tried to leave, but something kept pulling me back. Every time I packed up my equipment, I'd hear my name being called in voices. I almost recognized. Voices that sounded like my ex-wife, like my mother, like friends I'd lost touch with. Michael. Michael. Don't leave us. The voices were coming from the graves now, and when I looked at my photos, I could see the dead people more clearly than before. They weren't scary exactly, just incredibly sad. Lost. Forgotten. As the sun started to set, something else began to happen. Water started seeping out of the granite rock face. Not regular water, this was red and salty, and it was flowing upward instead of down. Like the mountain itself was crying tears of blood. The sound of crying became so loud I had to cover my ears. It echoed off the rocks and seemed to come from inside my own head. My depression, which had been manageable for months, suddenly felt crushing and hopeless. I realized I was in danger. Not from the dead people, they seemed to want help, not to hurt me, but from the sadness itself. It was so strong it made me want to lie down next to one of those graves and never get up again. I forced myself to walk back toward my truck. Every step was hard, like walking through deep mud. The voices called my name louder and louder, begging me not to leave them alone again. But I kept walking. I had to. If I stayed, I might never want to leave. When I finally got home, I called the one person I thought might understand what was happening. James Swimmer was a Cherokee elder who sometimes helped the Forest Service with historical questions. If anyone knew about the old stories, it would be him. "Mr. Swimmer," I said when he answered the phone, "this is Michael Tearstone from the Forest Service. I need to ask you about Looking Glass Rock." There was a long pause. Then he said, "You've been hearing the crying." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said, "and seeing things. Dead people." "How many graves did you find?" 23 so far." Another pause. "It's worse than I thought. You need to stay away from there, Michael, at least until we can figure out what to do." "What's happening to me?" "The mountain is waking up," he said. "All those people who died without proper mourning, they're still there, still waiting, and now they know someone can see them." James Swimmer met me at Looking Glass Rock the next morning. He was a small, quiet man in his 70s, with gray hair and a long braid. He brought sage and cedar, other plants I didn't recognize, and a drum made from deer hide. "Your ancestors called. This place, where the mountain weeps," he told me, as we hiked toward the graves. It was a sacred mourning ground. When someone died, their family would come here to cry for them. The mountain would hold their grief and help them heal. The crying sound started as soon as we got close to the burial area. James nodded like he expected it. "During the wars and the logging days, too many people died here too fast," he continued. "No time for proper ceremonies. No families to mourn them. Their grief got trapped in the rock itself." I showed him the photos I'd taken. He studied them carefully, pointing out details I'd missed. "This one died far from home," he said, indicating a young soldier. "This woman lost her children. This man was killed in an accident, and his body was never sent back to his family." "What do they want?" I asked. "To be mourned, to be remembered, to have someone acknowledge that their lives mattered." As if responding to his words, the crying got louder. The water flowing from the rock face turned from red to clear, but it was still flowing upward, defying gravity. "The mountain has been holding their grief for over 100 years," James said. "It's too much. If we don't help them find peace, the sadness will keep growing until it drowns everything." He started unpacking his ceremonial supplies. "We need to perform a proper mourning ceremony for each person buried here. It will take all day, maybe longer." But as we began the ceremony, something went wrong. The dead people appeared all at once, not just in photos, but visible to both of us. They surrounded us, reaching out with pale hands, their mouths open in silent screams of grief, and their sadness hit me like a physical blow. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the pain of every person who had died alone and forgotten. It felt like drowning in tears that weren't mine. James kept chanting and drumming, but his voice sounded far away. Then the mountain began to flood. Water poured from every crack in the granite, turning the small stream into a raging river. But this wasn't regular flood water. It was the accumulated tears of centuries, carrying the grief of everyone who had ever died without proper mourning. The dead people were trying to pull me toward the water, not to hurt me, but because they wanted me to join them, to become part of their eternal mourning. In their loneliness, they thought having a living person to grieve with them would make the pain stop. I understood then that this was bigger than just the graves around Looking Glass Rock. The mountain was connected to other places where people had died unremembered. Battlefields, accident sites, forgotten cemeteries. All that accumulated grief was trying to find release. "Michael," James called out over the sound of rushing water. "You have to choose. Let them take you, or help me finish the ceremony." The sadness was so strong I could barely breast it. Think. Part of me wanted to give in, to stop fighting, and just let the grief wash over me forever. It would be easier than dealing with my own depression, my divorce, my loneliness. But then I remembered why I became a botanist in the first place. I wanted to protect living things, to help them grow and survive. And these dead people weren't really living anymore. They were trapped in the moment of their death, unable to move on. I forced myself to stand up and stumbled toward James. Together, we began naming every person we could identify from the graves. We called out their stories, acknowledged their lives, honored their deaths. With each name we spoke, one of the dead people would stop crying and fade away, finally at peace. The floodwater started to recede, but there were so many of them, and with each person we helped to move on, I felt a piece of their sadness settle into me. By the time we finished, I was carrying the grief of dozens of forgotten souls. The mountain stopped crying. The water returned to its normal flow. The supernatural sadness lifted, leaving only the natural beauty of the forest. But I was changed. I could feel the weight of all those untold stories, all those unmourned deaths. It wasn't crushing anymore, but it was always there, a reminder that every life matters, even the forgotten ones. James and I spent the next 3 days building proper markers for each grave. We used stones from the mountain and wooden crosses made from fallen trees. On each one, we carved what we knew about the person buried there. Their name if we had it, the year they died, how they came to be in this place. The Forest Service approved my request to make the area an official memorial site. I wrote up a report about the historical significance of the burial ground, leaving out the supernatural parts. My supervisor was impressed with my thorough historical research. My depression didn't go away completely, but it changed. Instead of feeling hopeless about my own problems, I felt connected to something larger, the long chain of human experience. Joy and sorrow mixed together. I started seeing a counselor in town, talking about my divorce and learning healthier ways to process grief. I also started visiting other forgotten burial sites throughout the region. There are more than you'd think. Old family cemeteries grown over with weeds, unmarked graves in remote corners of the forest, places where history was buried along with the bodies. At each site, I perform a simple ceremony James taught me. I clean up the graves, place flowers, and speak the names of the dead if I can find them. It helps them rest in peace, and it helps me remember that sadness is meant to be shared, not carried alone. Sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm camping in the mountains, I still hear crying in the distance. But now I know what it means. Somewhere, there are people who died without being properly mourned, and they're waiting for someone to remember them. Last month, I got a call from another ranger in Virginia. He'd heard about my work at Looking Glass Rock and wanted my help. Hikers in his area were reporting strange sounds near an old Civil War battlefield, sounds like weeping that seemed to come from the ground itself. I packed my equipment and made the drive. Some work is too important to ignore. The mountain taught me that grief isn't something to be feared or avoided. It's the price we pay for love, for caring about each other. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is cry for someone who has no one left to mourn them. I still work as a botanist at Pisgah National Forest. I still study rare plants and protect endangered species. But now I protect something else too, the memory of the forgotten dead and the sacred places where the earth itself holds our tears. Because every life matters. Every death deserves to be mourned. And sometimes, if you listen carefully to the mountains, you can hear them weeping for all of us. My name is Franklin Graveyard, and I've been a trail ranger in the George Washington National Forest for 22 years. I know that sounds like a made-up name, but it's real enough. My daddy always said it came from some old church cemetery back in Ireland. Never thought much about it until what happened on Massanutten Mountain. I'm 51 years old, been working these mountains since I got back from the war. Lost my wife Sarah 3 years ago to cancer, and this job is all I got left that makes sense. I built most of the trails in my sector with my own hands. Every bridge, every marker, every cleared path through the thick Virginia woods. When folks get lost up here, they call me. When hunters go missing, I'm the one who finds them. It was November 1954, first week of hunting season. The weather had turned cold early, with frost covering the leaves each morning. I was sitting in the ranger station, updating my trail maps, when the call came in. "Frank, we got 3 hunting parties that didn't come back yesterday," said Sheriff Coleman from the valley. "Their families are worried sick." I pulled out my big map of the area. Where were they headed? All different spots. The Morrison boys were going up near Signal Knob. Jim Patterson took his son to Buzzard Rock, and that German fellow, Mueller, said he was hunting the old cemetery trail. I knew all those places like the back of my hand. Signal Knob was the highest peak, where they had the Confederate signal station during the war. Buzzard Rock was a good spot for deer, about 5 miles north. But the cemetery trail, that was odd. I'd built that trail myself 2 years ago, and there wasn't much hunting there. Just an old German graveyard from the 1700s, hidden back in the woods. I'll head out first thing, I told him. Probably just stayed out too late and made camp somewhere. But something felt wrong about it. In 22 years, I'd never had 3 hunting parties go missing at the same time. These weren't city folks who didn't know the woods. Jim Patterson had been hunting these mountains since he was 12. The Morrison boys grew up here. And Dr. Mueller, he was one of those college types who studied local history, but he knew his way around. I loaded up my truck with supplies, rope, first aid kit, emergency food, and my old army compass. The morning was gray and cold, with low clouds hanging over the ridges. As I drove up the mountain road, I noticed something strange. The woods were too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed muffled. I started at Signal Knob, where the Morrison boys should have been. Found their truck right where they said they'd park it. Their gear was still inside. Extra ammunition, sandwiches their mother had packed, even their good hunting knives. But no sign of the boys themselves. I followed their trail into the woods. The tracks were clear enough at first. 2 sets of boots heading northwest toward the deer runs. But after about half a mile, something weird happened. The tracks just changed direction. Instead of following the game trail they'd been on, they turned south toward the old German cemetery. That didn't make sense. The Morrison boys knew these woods. They knew there wasn't any good hunting down that way. But the tracks were clear, both boys, walking steady, not running like they were being chased. Just walking south toward the cemetery. I followed the tracks for another mile until they reached the old trail I'd built 2 years ago. That's when I found something that made my skin crawl. Mixed in with the fresh boot prints were old trail markers, wooden posts with German writing carved into them. I'd never seen these markers before, and I'd walked this trail 100 times. The markers looked old, maybe 100 years or more. The wood was dark and weathered, and the German words were carved deep. I couldn't read German, but the markers seemed to point the way along the trail, like road signs. I kept following the tracks, but now I was getting confused. The trail didn't look the same as when I'd built it. It seemed wider somehow, and the surface was different. Instead of the packed dirt and leaves I remembered, it looked like it was made of small white stones. In the gray morning light, I couldn't quite make out what kind of stones they were. The trail led deeper into the woods, past places I thought I knew. After another half hour of walking, I should have reached the German cemetery. Instead, I found myself in a clearing I'd never seen before. In the center was a stone monument, covered with German writing and dates from the 1750 seconds. That's when I heard voices. Thank God, someone's coming. I turned around and saw Jim Patterson and his son Bobby walking toward me from the tree line. They looked tired and confused, but not hurt. Jim, where the hell have you been? I called out. Your wife's been worried, sick. What do you mean? Jim looked genuinely puzzled. We've been walking this trail for about an hour. Got turned around somehow. Bobby swore he knew a shortcut to Buzzard Rock, but this trail just keeps going. I stared at him. Jim, you've been missing since yesterday morning. It's almost noon now. That's impossible, Bobby said. We left the truck right after sunrise. Been walking maybe an hour, 2 at most. But I could see the confusion in their eyes. They really believed they'd only been walking for an hour, and they were on the same strange trail I was following, the one with the white stone surface and the German markers. Where did you come from just now? I asked. Jim pointed back the way they'd come. Following this trail. Thought it would lead us back to familiar ground, but everything looks different. Trees in the wrong places, hills where there shouldn't be hills. I looked down at the trail surface again, and in the clearer light, I could finally see what those white stones really were. They weren't stones at all. They were bones, human bones, worn smooth and packed tight, making a road surface that stretched as far as I could see in both directions. I was standing on a road made of human bones, and I'd been walking on it for over an hour without realizing it. I bent down and touched the trail surface, hoping I was wrong. But there was no mistake. These were definitely human bones. Leg bones, arm bones, pieces of skulls and ribs, all worn smooth like river rocks and fitted together to make a solid road. Some were old and yellowed, others looked almost fresh. "Jim," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what does this trail look like to you?" He squinted down at it. "Just a regular dirt trail, little rocky maybe." "Why?" I looked again. To me, it was clearly bones. But Jim and Bobby were seeing a normal trail. That scared me more than anything. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Right, now." "But which way?" Bobby asked. "We've been trying to find our way back for." He stopped and looked confused. "How long have we been walking?" "You said an hour," I reminded him. "Did I?" "It feels longer now. Feels like we've been walking for days." I pulled out my compass, but the needle was spinning slowly, unable to find north. I tried to remember which direction we'd come from, but the trees all looked the same. Worse, they looked wrong somehow. Too tall, too close together, arranged in patterns that reminded me of cemetery plots. "This way," I said, picking a direction that felt right. "Stay close." We started walking, but something was happening to the trail. Instead of getting narrower, like a normal forest path, it was getting wider, and there were more of those German markers appearing, pointing the way forward. After what felt like 20 minutes, we came to a junction I'd never seen before. 3 trails met here, all paved with the same bone surface. In the center was a tall stone marker with German writing and what looked like dates going back to the 1700s. "Frank," Jim said quietly, "I'm starting to see it too." "See what?" "The bones. This whole trail is made of bones." Bobby was backing away from the marker. "Dad, look at the dates on this thing. Some of them are from last year, last month." I moved closer to read the stone. The German writing was old, but at the bottom, carved in fresh letters, were 3 names I recognized. Heinrich Braun, October 1954. William Schneider, October 1954. And Thomas Becker, November 1954. Those were hunters who'd gone missing in Thomas Brassen 954. The past few months. Hunters I'd searched for and never found. "We're leaving," I said. "Now." But as we turned to go back the way we came, I realized we had a problem. There were now 4 trails leading away from the junction, not 3. And I couldn't tell which one we'd used to get here. "It was that one," Bobby said, pointing to the trail on our left. "No, it was that one," Jim said, pointing to the right. I had no idea which trail was right. They all looked the same, wide bone roads stretching into the dark woods. We picked the left trail and started walking fast. But instead of leading us back to familiar ground, it took us to another junction. This one had 5 trails meeting, and another stone marker with more names. I saw the Morrison boys' names carved at the bottom. Peter Morrison, November 1954. John Morrison, November 1954. "That's impossible," I said. "Those boys went missing yesterday." "Frank," Jim whispered, "look behind us." I turned around. The trail we'd just walked was gone. In its place was solid forest, trees growing so close together that no one could pass between them. We were trapped. That's when we heard the footsteps. They were coming from ahead of us, down the widest of the bone roads. Not one person walking, but many, dozens of footsteps, all in perfect rhythm, like soldiers marching. But there was something wrong with the sound. It was too hollow, like boots walking on dry wood instead of ground. "Hide," I whispered. We ducked behind the stone marker just as the procession came into view. It was the most terrible thing I'd ever seen, and I'd seen plenty of terrible things in the war. They were people, or had been people once. Men, women, even children, all walking in perfect formation down the bone road. But they were wrong. Their clothes were from different time periods, some wearing colonial dress, others in more modern hunting gear. Their skin was gray and sunken, and some were just skeletons held together by rotted clothing. At the front of the procession walked a tall figure in a black colonial coat and tricorn hat. Where his face should have been was just a skull, but his eye sockets glowed with a cold blue light. In his hand, he carried a long staff topped with a human skull. The procession stopped at the junction, and the leader looked directly at our hiding spot. "Franklin Graveyard," he said in a voice like wind through dry leaves. Trail builder. Road maker. You have served us well these many years. I felt Jim grab my arm, but I couldn't move. The thing knew my name. Come, the figure continued. Join the procession. Your roads have led many to us. Now it is time for you to walk the bone road yourself. Behind him, I could see the faces of the dead. Some I recognized: Heinrich Braun, William Schneider, the Morrison boys. They looked at me with empty eyes, but their mouths moved in silent words. Join us. Join us. The leader raised his staff, and the bone road began to glow with that same cold blue light. I have been building this road for 200 years, he said. Each trail you build makes it stronger. Each lost soul you send to us makes it longer. You are my best servant, Franklin Graveyard, though you never knew it. That's when I understood the horrible truth. Every trail I'd built in 22 years, every path I'd carved through the forest, I'd been building roads for the dead without knowing it. I'd been helping this thing trap people. The procession started moving again, coming straight for us. I grabbed Jim and Bobby. Run! We ran down the nearest bone road, our boots echoing hollow on the surface. Behind us, I could hear the procession following, dozens of footsteps keeping perfect time, never getting faster but never falling behind either. This way, I gasped, pulling Jim and Bobby toward what looked like a gap in the trees. But as we got closer, I realized it wasn't a gap at all. It was another trail, this one even wider than the last. And standing at its entrance was Dr. Muller, the German hunter who'd been reported missing. Dr. Muller, Bobby called out. Thank God, maybe you know the way out. But as we got closer, I could see something was wrong with him. His skin had a gray tint, and his eyes were cloudy. When he smiled, his teeth looked yellow and cracked. Guten Tag, Franklin, he said in a voice that sounded like it was coming from far away. I have been waiting for you. The Nokenweg has need of its master builder. Nokenweg? I asked. The Bone Road? He translated. An old story from my homeland. Roads that connect the world of the living to the world of the dead. Roads that need maintenance. He stepped aside and gestured down the trail. Come, your work is not finished. I could see now that this trail was different from the others. Instead of being made from random bones, this one was carefully constructed. Femurs formed the edges, ribs made a pattern down the center, and skulls were placed at regular intervals, like mile markers. It was beautiful in a horrible way, like a work of art made from death. I built this trail 2 years ago, I whispered. I remember every tree I cut, every stone I moved. Yes, Mueller said, and the Nokenweg used your work as its foundation. Every trail you have built becomes part of its network. Every lost hiker feeds its growth. The sound of marching was getting closer. I looked back and saw the procession emerging from the trees, led by the figure in the black coat. There is no escape. Franklin Graveyard, the leader called. Every trail leads to us. You built them that way. I felt sick. 22 years of work, 22 years of helping people enjoy these beautiful mountains, and I'd been building a trap the whole time. Run, I told Jim and Bobby. Follow this trail as far as you can, then get off it and head downhill. Don't stop until you reach the road. What about you? Jim asked. I'm going to try to fix this. They disappeared down the bone road, and I turned to face the procession. The leader was close now, close enough that I could see the details of his skull face. Old battle scars marked the bone, and his teeth were filed to sharp points. Who are you? I demanded. I am the Wegegeist, the road spirit. I came to this land with the first German settlers, followed them across the ocean to continue my work. For 200 years, I have built the Nokenweg, connecting every cemetery, every burial ground, every place where the dead rest. He gestured with his staff at the network of bone roads stretching in all directions. The dead must have roads to travel between their resting places. They must be able to visit their kin, to gather for the ancient festivals, to process from one world to the next. Without the Nokenweg, the dead would wander lost forever. And the living people you've taken? Builders. Maintainers. The Nokenweg requires constant care. I choose those with the skills I need. Trail builders, road workers, engineers. They serve for a time, then join the eternal procession. I thought about my engineering training from the war, all the roads and bridges I'd built in Europe. No wonder he'd chosen me. The Morrison boys weren't builders, I said. No, but they were young and strong, good for laying the foundation stones. He smiled with those sharp teeth. And you, Franklin Graveyard, have been my most valuable servant. Every trail you built became part of my network. Every improvement you made strengthened the connection between the worlds. I looked at the bone road beneath my feet and realized he was right. I could see the pattern now. This wasn't just a single trail, but a whole network of interconnected roads, all leading to the same destination. A massive German cemetery hidden deep in the mountains, where hundreds of headstones stood in perfect rows. Your family name called to me, the Wegegeist continued. Graveyard, a keeper of the dead. You were meant for this work. The procession had formed a circle around us. I counted at least 50 figures. Men, women, and children from different time periods, all with that same gray skin and empty eyes. Some carried tools, shovels, picks, surveying equipment. Others held the bones that would become new road sections. Now, the Wegegeist said, raising his staff, take your place as master builder of the Nokenweg. Help me extend these roads to every cemetery in Virginia, every burial ground in the mountains. Help me connect the dead across all the land. The blue light from his staff began to spread along the bone roads, and I felt a cold numbness creeping up my legs. Where the light touched me, my skin began to turn gray. But I had one advantage the Wegegeist didn't know about. 22 years of building trails had taught me how to read the land, how to find the weak points in any construction. And my Army engineering training had taught me how to destroy roads just as well as build them. I could see it now, the Keystone Trail, the main road that connected all the others. If I could break that connection, the whole network would collapse. The problem was, the Keystone Trail led straight through the heart of the cemetery. To reach it, I'd have to walk through hundreds of graves and face the Wegegeist on his strongest ground. As the cold spread up to my waist, I made my choice. I pulled out my emergency flare gun and fired it straight at the Wegegeist's skull face. The flare exploded against the Wegegeist's skull in a burst of red light. He screamed, a sound like wind tearing through dead trees, and stumbled backward. The blue light from his staff flickered and went out. The procession of the dead froze in place, and I felt the numbness in my legs disappear. This was my chance. I ran toward the cemetery, following the main bone road as it curved between massive oak trees. Behind me, I could hear the Wegegeist rallying his followers. Stop him! His voice echoed through the woods. He must not reach the source. The cemetery was huge, hundreds of German graves dating back to the 1,750 seconds, all arranged in perfect rows. At the center was a massive stone monument, and I could see that all the bone roads led to it like spokes on a wheel. If I could destroy that monument, I might be able to break the whole network. But first, I had to get past the Guardians. They rose from the graves as I ran, skeletal figures in rotted clothing, some still carrying the tools they'd been buried with. Farmers with rusty scythes, soldiers with broken muskets, children with moldy toys. They moved to block my path, their bones clicking together as they walked. I dodged between the headstones, using my knowledge of cemetery layouts to find the clearest route. These old German cemeteries were always organized the same way, family plots arranged by arrival date, with the oldest families closest to the center. A skeletal farmer swung his scythe at my head. I ducked and kept running, leaping over a low headstone. A dead soldier tried to grab me with bony fingers, but I rolled away and came up running. The monument was close now, a tall stone obelisk covered with German writing and surrounded by the oldest graves. At its base, I could see the source of the bone roads. They weren't built on top of the ground. They were growing up from underground, spreading like roots from the monument itself. The Wegegeist appeared between me and the monument, his skull face blazing with fury. "You cannot destroy what has taken 2 centuries to build," he screamed. "Watch me," I said, and pulled out my emergency explosives. I'd carried them for 22 years, small charges for clearing trail obstacles. Never thought I'd use them like this. The Wegegeist raised his staff, and every bone road in the cemetery began to glow. The light spread to the graves themselves, and more dead began rising, not just a few dozen now, but hundreds. Every person buried in this cemetery for the past 200 years was standing up, reaching for me with skeletal hands. I ran straight at the monument, dodging grasping fingers and swinging weapons. At the last second, I dove and rolled, coming up right at the base of the obelisk. The German writing was clearer here, and I could make out some of the words. It was a list of names, the builders and maintainers of the Nachenweg. At the very top, carved in fresh stone, was my own name. Franklin Graveyard, Master Builder, 1932 to 1954. 1932, the year I'd started learning engineering in high school, 1954, this year. He'd been planning this for my entire adult life. You see now, the Wegegeist said, walking slowly toward me through the crowd of dead. You were always meant to be here. Every choice you made, every trail you built, led to this moment. He was right. Looking back, I could see the pattern. My choice to study engineering, my decision to work in the Forest Service, even meeting my wife Sarah at a trail dedication ceremony, meant it had all been planned. Sarah, I whispered. Did you kill my wife too? Cancer is natural, he said. But I may have encouraged you to spend more time in the forest after her death. Grief makes excellent motivation for trail building. The rage that filled me was like nothing I'd felt since the war. This thing had manipulated my entire life, used my grief to make me a better servant. Every trail I'd built in Sarah's memory had been feeding his network of death. I placed the explosive charges around the base of the monument and pulled out the detonator. If I do this, what happens to all these people? I gestured at the crowd of dead surrounding us. They return to their rest, the Wegegeist said. The Nachenweg will be broken, the roads between worlds will close. And you will be lost in these woods forever. Without the bone roads to guide you, you will never find your way out. You will wander until you die of thirst or hunger, and your body will never be found. I thought about that. 22 years of building trails, and I'd lose the ability to navigate the woods I loved. I'd die lost in my own forest. But Jim Patterson and his son would live. The Morrison boys would find their way home. No more hunters would disappear on roads made of bones. Fair trade, I said, and pressed the detonator. The explosion shattered the monument into 1,000 pieces. Instantly, the blue light went out of all the bone roads. The skeletal dead collapsed back into their graves, and the Wegegeist let out a scream that shook the trees. What have you done? He wailed as his form began to fade. 200 years of work. The connections between the worlds. Find another way, I said. One that doesn't involve killing people. He faded like smoke, his last words echoing through the cemetery. You will pay for this, Franklin Graveyard. You will pay with everything you are. Then he was gone, and the cemetery was just a cemetery again. Old headstones in the death, morning light, no bone roads, no spectral processions. I started walking toward where I thought the edge of the forest should be, but every direction looked the same. I walked for 3 days before the search party found me. Jim Patterson led them to me, following my voice when I finally got close enough to the road to shout for help. I was dehydrated, exhausted, and completely lost in woods I'd worked in for 22 years. Frank, where the hell have you been? Sheriff Coleman asked as they loaded me into the ambulance. Jim and Bobby came out yesterday saying you'd saved their lives, but then you vanished. I got turned around, I said. It was the truth. Just not all of it. Turned around? Frank, you know these woods better than anyone. How do you get lost in your own forest? I couldn't answer that. How do you explain that you destroyed your own ability to navigate in order to save lives? The doctor in town said I was suffering from exhaustion and dehydration, but otherwise fine. The Morrison boys turned up that same day, walking out of the woods confused but unhurt. They couldn't remember much about their time missing, just that they'd followed some old trail that led them in circles. Dr. Mueller's body was found a week later, at the bottom of a ravine. Natural causes, the coroner said. Heart attack, probably brought on by getting lost and panicked. There was no sign of the bone roads, no German trail markers, no evidence of anything supernatural. But I knew the truth. They transferred me to office duty after I failed 3 basic navigation tests. 22 years of perfect trail knowledge, gone. I couldn't find my way from the parking lot to trails I'd built with my own hands. It was like someone had erased all the maps in my head. Early retirement might be best, my supervisor said gently. Maybe the war finally caught up with you, Frank. Combat stress can show up years later. I didn't argue. How could I explain that I'd made a deal with a supernatural entity? That I'd traded my life's work to save lives? I moved to town and got a job at the hardware store. Simple work, helping folks pick out tools and supplies. Sometimes hunters would come in, planning trips to the George Washington National Forest. I'd try to give them advice about the trails, but I couldn't remember where any of them led. It's been 6 months now since that November morning. The missing persons reports in the forest have stopped completely. No more hunters disappearing on trails that lead nowhere. No more bone roads connecting the world of the living to the world of the dead. But sometimes, late at night, I drive up to the edge of the forest and sit in my truck, looking at the dark trees. I can feel them calling to me, all those trails I built, all those paths I knew better than my own hands. They're still there, but I can't find them anymore. The worst part is the dreams. Every night, I dream about walking the bone roads again. I see the Wegegeist rebuilding his network somewhere else, in some other forest, with some other engineer who doesn't know what he's really building. I see new names being carved on monument stones, new processions of the dead marching down roads made of human remains. And sometimes, in those dreams, I hear my own voice calling out to other trail builders, "Join us, the roads need maintenance. The dead need their highways." I wake up in a cold sweat, checking my hands to make sure they're still flesh and not bone. The Wegegeist was right about one thing. I am paying for what I did. Every day I pay, with the loss of everything I was good at, everything that defined me. But it was worth it. No more families will get that phone call about missing hunters. No more young men will disappear following trails that shouldn't exist. Still, I keep a bag packed in my closet. Emergency supplies, a compass, flares, everything I'd need for one more trip into the woods. Because sometimes I wonder if destroying the Nokenweg was enough, or if it's growing back somewhere else. And if it is, I might be the only one who knows how to stop it, even if I can't find my way home afterward. My name is Franklin Graveyard, and I used to be the best trail builder in Virginia. Now I'm just a man who traded everything he was to save people he'll never meet. Some nights, when the wind is right, I can still hear footsteps on gravel roads that shouldn't exist. But they're getting fainter. I hope. My name is Catherine Wolfbane, and I've been a park ranger at Nantahala National Forest for 13 years. Before that, I was a veterinarian for 8 years, until I got tired of putting down healthy animals because their owners couldn't afford treatment. Out here in the mountains of North Carolina, I deal with wildlife management and predator control. It's honest work, and it keeps me close to my elderly father who lives on a small farm that borders the forest. People always ask about my last name. Wolfbane means poison to wolves in the old language. My great-grandfather chose it when he came to America, though I never knew why until recently. I always figured it was just one of those family names that sounded tougher than it really was. It's December 1966, and we've had more snow than usual. The Joyce-Kilmer Wilderness area, where I work most days, has trees that are 400 years old, some of the last old-growth forest left in the mountains. When you walk among those ancient giants, you feel small and quiet, like you're in a cathedral made of wood and time. I never believed the Cherokee stories about wolf men who hunt in packs. The local tribes have lived here longer than anyone can remember, and their stories about forest guardians and shape-shifting wolves always seemed like ways to explain things they couldn't understand. Taringa, livestock losses, strange sounds in the night, that sort of thing. I'm a scientist. I believe in what I can see and touch and prove. This morning started like any other. I was checking on some live traps I'd set near Miller's farm. He'd been losing chickens to what he thought were foxes. But when I got to the first trap, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. After 13 years out here, you learn to read the woods like a book. When the birds stop singing and the squirrels stop chattering, it usually means there's a predator nearby. Something big. I found tracks around the trap, but they didn't make sense. They started as wolf prints, larger than any wolf should be in North Carolina, since we haven't had wolves here for 30 years. But halfway to the trap, the prints changed. They got longer, more like a human foot, but with claw marks at the tips. I've seen plenty of strange things in my years as a ranger. Bears walking on their hind legs, mountain lions in places they shouldn't be, even the occasional escaped exotic pet. But I'd never seen anything like these tracks. I took photos with my camera and made plaster casts like I was trained to do. The photos didn't turn out well. Something about the light was wrong, making everything look shadowy and unclear. When I got to Miller's farm around noon, I found him standing in his chicken yard, looking pale and shaken. 3 more chickens were dead, but they hadn't been eaten. They'd been arranged in a perfect triangle, heads pointing toward the forest. The wire mesh of the chicken coop had been cut with something sharp. Not torn like an animal would do it, but cut clean through in straight lines. "Kathy," Miller said, his voice shaking a little, "I don't think this was foxes." I agreed with him, but I didn't know what else to tell him. In all my years of predator control, I'd never seen anything kill without eating or arrange its kills in patterns. Animals don't think that way. They hunt because they're hungry, not because they want to send messages. That evening, I drove back to check on my father. His farm sits right at the edge of the forest, and at 78, he's too stubborn to move somewhere safer. The snow was falling harder as I pulled into his driveway, and my headlights caught something that made me stop the truck. There were yellow eyes watching from the tree line. Not one pair, dozens of them, all at the same height, all perfectly still. I grabbed my flashlight and got out of the truck, but when I shined the beam toward the trees, there was nothing there. Just snow falling through empty branches. My father came out on the porch, his old hunting rifle in his hands. "They've been watching the house since dark," he said quietly. "Haven't made a sound, but they're there. I can feel them." I spent the night at his place, sitting by the window with my own rifle across my knees. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the woods. Shapes that were too big to be dogs, too coordinated to be random. They moved like they were working together, like they had a plan. Around 3 in the morning, they started howling. But it didn't sound like any wolf I'd ever heard on nature recordings. It sounded almost like voices calling names across the darkness. The next morning, I called the main ranger station to report the unusual activity. But the phones were down. An ice storm had knocked out the line sometime during the night. My radio wasn't working either, just static and strange whistling sounds that almost sounded like music. I decided to head up to the old fire tower to see if I could get better reception from higher ground. The road up the mountain was barely passable with all the snow, but my truck has good tires and I know these roads like the back of my hand. What bothered me was that I didn't see any other tire tracks. In December, there should have been hunters and loggers using these trails. Halfway up the mountain, I found the first body. It was Tom Bradley, a local hunter I'd known for years. He was sitting against a large oak tree, his rifle across his lap, looking for all the world like he'd just stopped to rest. But his eyes were wide open and staring, and there wasn't a mark on him. No blood, no wounds, nothing to explain why a healthy 40-year-old man would just die sitting against a tree. When I got closer, I saw that his rifle had been emptied, all 6 shots fired, brass casings scattered in the snow around him. But there was no sign of what he'd been shooting at. More strange, they were his tracks leading up to the tree. They showed him backing up step by step, firing as he went, like he was trying to keep something away from him. I followed his trail backward and found where he'd made camp the night before. His tent was shredded, but not by claws. The cuts were too clean, too straight. His gear was scattered, but arranged in the same triangular pattern I'd seen with Miller's chickens. And his food was untouched. Whatever had done this wasn't interested in eating. At the fire tower, I tried the emergency radio, but got nothing except that same whistling sound. I was completely cut off from the outside world. The nearest town was 30 miles away, over mountain roads that were probably impassable by now. I made the decision to head back to Tom's campsite and examine it more carefully. That's when I found the second body. Jake Morrison was hanging upside down from a tree branch, about 10 feet off the ground. He was another local hunter, someone who knew these woods as well as I did. Like Tom, there were no visible wounds, but his rifle was empty and the brass casings were arranged in a neat circle directly under his body. What scared me most was that Jake was a big man, over 200 pounds, and he was hanging from a branch that should have broken under his weight. But the branch was fine, not even bent. It was like whatever had put him there was strong enough to make the laws of physics not matter. I was taking photos of the scene when I heard movement in the trees behind me. I turned around slowly, my hand on my sidearm, and saw them. 3 wolves. But not like any wolves I'd seen in textbooks or nature films. These were huge, the size of small horses, and they were standing on their hind legs like people. Their front paws looked wrong too, more like hands with long claws than regular wolf feet. The one in the middle looked right at me with bright yellow eyes that held far too much intelligence. It tilted, its head like a dog might, but there was nothing playful about the gesture. It was studying me, figuring me out. Then it smiled. I know that sounds impossible, but I swear it smiled at me, showing teeth that were too sharp and too knowing. And when it opened its mouth, what came out wasn't a howl or a growl. It spoke my name. "Catherine Wolfbane," it said in a voice like wind through pine trees. "We've been waiting for you." I drew my pistol, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. The creature, because that's what it was, not an animal, just watched me with that terrible patient smile. "You cannot run from us," it continued. "This is our forest. We know every tree, every rock, every hiding place. We know the scent of your fear." I fired 3 shots center mass, and I'm a good shot. I've put down charging bears with less. But the bullets passed right through the creature like it was made of mist. It didn't even flinch. "Iron cannot harm us," it said. "We are the spirits of the last pack, the ones your people murdered when they cleared our hunting grounds. We have returned to reclaim what was stolen." The other 2 creatures spread out to either side, moving with perfect coordination. I realized they were surrounding me, cutting off my escape routes. This wasn't random hunting, this was strategy. I backed toward my truck, keeping the gun trained on them even though I knew it was useless. The creatures followed at a walking pace, never hurrying, never losing that terrifying coordination. They knew I couldn't outrun them. They were just letting me tire myself out. "Your great-grandfather knew our kind," the leader said. "He carried the name Wolfbane because he feared us. He knew we would return someday to balance the scales." I made it to my truck and slammed the door, locking it out of instinct even though locks wouldn't stop creatures that bullets couldn't touch. The engine turned over on the 3rd try, and I backed down the mountain road as fast as I dared in the snow. In my rearview mirror, I could see them following. Not running, just walking with that same steady pace. And somehow, they were keeping up with my truck. I drove straight to my father's house, checking my mirrors every few seconds. The creatures had vanished somewhere along the way, but I could feel them watching from the forest. When I got to the house, all the lights were on, and my father was standing on the porch with his rifle. "They've been circling the house for an hour," he said as I ran up the steps. "Haven't come closer than the tree line, but they're out there. How many did you see?" "3, I said, then stopped. "Wait, how did you know I'd seen them?" "Because you look like you've seen ghosts, and because they started howling your name about the time you would have reached the fire tower." We went inside and barricaded the doors with furniture. I told him about Tom and Jake, about the creatures that spoke and couldn't be shot. He listened without interrupting, his old hands steady on his rifle. "Your great-grandfather told me stories," he said when I finished, "about the last wolf pack in these mountains and what happened to them. I always thought they were just stories. What happened to them? Government bounty hunters came through in 1932, poisoned every wolf they could find, shot the rest. Your great-grandfather was one of them. That's why he took the name Wolfbane, Wolfbane. He thought killing wolves made him a hero." The lights went out. Emergency generator kicked in a few seconds later, but in that moment of darkness, I saw yellow eyes pressed against every window of the house. They were surrounding us. "Catherine Wolfbane," came the voice from outside, but now it was coming from multiple directions. They were all talking at once, their voices overlapping. "Come outside, face what your family has done. We can protect you," my father said, but his voice was shaking. "The house has running water underneath it." The old Cherokee said, "Spirits can't cross running water." That's when we heard the scratching. Something was digging under the house, right where the water pipes ran. They were trying to cut off our protection. I looked out the kitchen window and saw more of them than before. At least a dozen wolves, all standing upright, all watching the house with those intelligent yellow eyes. Some of them had started to change shape, becoming more human-like. Their snouts shortened, their bodies stretched upward. Their paws became hands with opposable thumbs. One of them picked up a large rock and threw it through the living room window. Glass exploded inward, and snow began blowing into the house. They were using tools now, thinking like humans, but with the pack coordination of wolves. "We need to get to the truck," I said. "Try to make it to town. They'll just follow us," my father said, "and we'll be in the open." But staying wasn't an option anymore. I could hear them on the roof now, their claws scratching against the metal. The scratching under the house was getting louder too. Whatever protection running water was supposed to provide, they were finding ways around it. We made our break during a brief lull in the noise outside. I went first, my father right behind me, both of us running for the truck. We almost made it. The pack leader stepped out from behind my truck just as I reached for the door handle. Up close, in its more human form, it was even more terrifying. It stood 7 feet tall with the face of a man, but the eyes and teeth of a wolf. Its hands ended in claws that could tear through metal. "You cannot run from justice," it said. "Your family's debt must be paid." More of them emerged from the darkness around us. We were completely surrounded now, cut off from the house and the truck. My father raised his rifle, but the creature closest to him moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. It knocked the gun from his hands and pinned him to the ground without seeming to exert any effort. "Old man," it said, "you are not our target, but you raised the one who bears the name of our enemy." "Leave him alone," I said, raising my own gun, even though I knew it was pointless. "Your problem is with me." "Yes," the pack leader said. "You are Catherine Wolfbane, great-granddaughter of the poison maker. You work for the same government that slaughtered our kind. You carry the tools of our destruction." It gestured to my ranger uniform, my radio, my tranquilizer gun. All the equipment I used for wildlife management suddenly felt like weapons of oppression. "We offer you a choice," it continued. "Come with us willingly, face judgment for your family's crimes, and the old man lives. Refuse, and he dies first, slowly, while you watch." I looked at my father, pinned helpless under claws that could tear him apart. I looked at the circle of creatures surrounding us, their yellow eyes reflecting the truck's headlights like tiny suns. And I made the only choice I could. "I'll come with you," I said. "But you have to promise he won't be harmed." "The pack keeps its word," the leader said. "Unlike your kind." They led me deep into the Joyce Kilmer wilderness, to a part of the forest I'd never seen before. The trees here were older and larger than anywhere else, their trunks so wide that 10 people holding hands couldn't circle them. Snow fell through the canopy in lazy spirals, and the silence was complete except for the soft crunch of our footsteps. As we walked, the creatures began to change. Their wolf forms melted away like smoke, revealing the shapes of men and women dressed in clothing from another era. I recognized some of the styles, work clothes, and hunting gear from the 1930 seconds. These weren't just wolf spirits. They were the people who had been with the wolves when they died. We were the last pack, the leader explained as we walked. His human form was that of a man in his 30s, wearing a faded red flannel shirt and work boots. 7 wolves, 3 humans, who lived with us in the old way. Your great-grandfather's poison killed us all. He led me to a clearing where ancient stones formed a perfect circle. In the center was a pool of water so clear it looked like black glass in the moonlight. Around the edges of the circle were bones, wolf bones, and human bones mixed together. "This is where we died," he said. "This is where the last free pack made its stand against the poison makers. We ate the meat your great-grandfather left for us, thinking it was a gift from the forest. We died here together, wolves and humans as one." I knelt by the bone circle, finally understanding. "You're not just wolf spirits. You're everyone who died with them." "The Cherokee knew the old ways," said another voice. A woman stepped out from behind one of the Dun Fort, standing stones. She was dressed in traditional Cherokee clothing, but her eyes held the same yellow fire as the wolves. They knew that some humans could run with the pack, could be part of the wild instead of its enemy. "But your people forgot," the pack leader continued. "They built fences and roads. They cut down the old forests. They poisoned the last free things in these mountains. I looked around the circle and realized there were more of them now. Not just the dozen I'd seen at the house, but dozens more. Men and women from different time periods, all with those burning yellow eyes. And among them, moving like shadows, were the wolves themselves. Huge, ancient, and full of an intelligence that was both animal and human. Every generation, we return stronger, the leader said. Every time your people think they've conquered the wild, we come back to remind them what they've lost. What do you want from me? I asked. Justice, he said simply. Your great-grandfather took 7 wolves and 3 humans from this world. The debt must be repaid. I felt the weight of his words, but something didn't add up. If you want revenge on my family, why didn't you just kill me? Why bring me here? The woman in Cherokee dress spoke up. Because you are not just a wolfbane. You are also a healer. We have watched you tend the sick animals, protect the forest from those who would harm it. You understand the balance between human and wild. We offer you a choice, the pack leader said. Die here, and your family's debt is paid. Or join us, become part of the pack, and help us protect what remains of the old forest. I stared at him. Join you? How? Drink from the sacred pool, he said, gesturing to the black water in the center of the stone circle. Accept the wolf spirit into your heart. Become a guardian of the wild places. I walked to the edge of the pool and looked down into its depths. My reflection stared back at me, but as I watched, it began to change. My eyes took on a yellow glow. My features became sharper, more predatory. I could see myself as part of their pack, running through the forest under the full moon, protecting the ancient trees from chainsaws and bulldozers. But I could also see the cost. The humans who had joined the pack weren't really human anymore. They were something between wolf and person, belonging fully to neither world. If I drink, I said, what happens to my father? What happens to the people in the towns around the forest? They will be safe as long as they respect the boundaries, the pack leader said. But those who come to destroy the old places, who poison the streams or cut down the ancient trees, they will face our justice. I thought about Tom and Jake, hanging dead in the forest. Good men who had died for crimes they didn't even know they'd committed. I thought about my father, waiting at home for a daughter who might never return as the person he knew. And I thought about the wolves, the last of their kind, killed by poison 70 years ago. Murdered not for threatening humans, but for being wild in a world that had no room for wildness. I cupped my hands and dipped them into the sacred pool. The water was ice cold, but it seemed to pulse with its own life. As I brought it to my lips, I could feel the pack watching me, waiting to see what choice I would make. The water tasted like snow and pine needles and something older than memory. As I swallowed, I felt the change begin. The transformation was like being struck by lightning that lasted for hours. Every bone in my body felt like it was breaking and reforming. My senses exploded. I could suddenly smell every animal that had passed through the forest in the last week, hear heartbeats and breathing from miles away, see heat signatures glowing in the darkness. When it was over, I was still human, but I was something more as well. I could feel the pack's presence in my mind, a warm network of consciousness that stretched through the forest. I was connected to every wolf spirit, every guardian, every creature that called the old woods home. You are pack now, the leader said, and his voice came to me both through my ears and through the spirit connection. You are Catherine Wolfbane, the first of your family line to honor the old compact between human and wolf. They taught me the boundaries of their territory, every stream, every ridge, every ancient tree that was under their protection. They showed me how to move through the forest without disturbing its balance, how to speak with the spirits of the wild places, how to sense when someone entered the woods with destructive intent. Most importantly, they taught me my new role. I would remain a park ranger, but now I would be something more, a bridge between the human world and the wild, a guardian who could speak for those who had no voice in the courts of men. I returned to my father's house 3 days later. He took one look at my eyes and knew immediately what had happened. The yellow flame, he said quietly. Your great-grandfather described it in his journals. He said the wolves had eyes like burning stars. I told him everything, about the pack, about the choice I'd made, about what it meant for our family and our community. He listened without judgment. his old hands steady on his coffee cup. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "You did what he should have done 70 years ago." Over the following weeks, I developed new routines. My official duties as a ranger continued. I still managed wildlife populations, investigated poaching reports, maintained trails and facilities. But now I had other responsibilities as well. When developers tried to build a shopping center on land that bordered the old forest, I made sure their permits got lost in bureaucratic delays until they gave up and went elsewhere. When a chemical company tried to dump waste in streams that fed into the wilderness, I provided anonymous tips to environmental groups that resulted in federal investigations. And when hunters or hikers entered the protected areas with bad intentions, planning to poach rare animals or damage ancient trees, I warned them off. Most listened. A few didn't, and they learned why the Cherokee had always spoken of wolf guardians with such respect. I kept my enhanced senses mostly hidden, but they proved useful in my ranger work. I could track wounded animals by scent, locate lost hikers from miles away, and sense when predators were moving through areas with high human traffic. My success rate for finding missing persons became legendary among the other rangers. The pack visited me regularly, usually appearing in my dreams or during long hikes through the deepest parts of the forest. They taught me more about the history of the land, about the ancient agreements between humans and the wild, about my role as a bridge between two worlds that had forgotten how to speak to each other. Sometimes, on nights when the moon was full, I would run with them through the forest. In those moments, I understood what we had lost when we decided that wilderness was something to be conquered rather than respected. I felt the joy of being part of something larger than myself, connected to the eternal cycle of seasons and storms and growing things. But I also felt the weight of my responsibility. Every day, more of the wild places disappeared. Every year, the old forests grew smaller and the cities grew larger. The pack was patient, but they were also watchful. They remembered every broken promise, every sacred place destroyed in the name of progress. Other rangers began reporting unusual wildlife activity throughout the national forest system. Wolf sightings in places where wolves had been extinct for decades. Animals displaying unusual intelligence and coordination. Ancient trees that seemed to resist chainsaws and bulldozers through mechanical failures and equipment breakdowns. I knew what was happening. The pack was growing. In every place where wild things had been destroyed, the spirits were awakening. And in every place, they would need human allies, people who could speak for them in the world of permits and regulations and congressional hearings. 6 months after my transformation, I received a transfer request to supervise wildlife management for the entire southeastern national forest system. It was a promotion I hadn't applied for, but when I mentioned it to the pack leader during one of my dreams, he smiled that terrible knowing smile. "The old compact spreads," he said. "The wild places call to their guardians. There is much work to be done." I accepted the position, knowing that my real job was just beginning. Somewhere in every forest, in every preserved wilderness, the spirits of the last wild things were stirring, and they would need voices in the human world, protectors who could walk in both worlds. My name is Catherine Wolfbane, and I am no longer just a park ranger. I am a guardian of the spaces between civilization and wilderness, a keeper of promises made long ago and almost forgotten. The pack is patient, but it remembers everything, and it's growing stronger every day.